TRT is not perfect. And that's why when guys want to go on TRT when they don't need it, I'm like, look, this is a medical intervention for people who are sick. This is a imperfect way of fixing a pathway that's broken. This is not like a cheat code just to get like, testosterone levels of a footy player or some athlete that you haven't earned yourself. And I think like the really good YouTube channels are people who didn't intend to be YouTubers. They just came to share stuff. And people were like, oh, this is authentic. Whereas the people who are on YouTube to be YouTubers who want the attention and the fame and the career doing that kind of stuff, I think people can just see that and they're just like, this is lame. I don't like it.
I agree. And it feels like the amount of views they're getting might be misleading as opposed to what money or value they're giving. They might be getting the wrong views, if that makes sense.
I've got 1,000 subscribers on YouTube and 5,000 followers on Instagram, and I've been booked out for 6 months in advance for 4 years. Like I see guys who've got like 100K, 200K, and they are like, every time they put up a story, it's like, book in with me, book in with me. And I check their calendar, I'm like, I can book in with you tomorrow. Like you clearly aren't in demand.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, let's take an extreme example, ones that I know of. And this is something I wanted to discuss in the podcast, right? Like your strategy for business within this niche or niche, depending on how people want to say that word. But let's take an extreme example. Like there are girls that I know that have 100,000, even 1 million legitimate followers, but the majority of them are, Indians jerking off over them, and they're struggling to make money. So there isn't a direct correlation followers to money, and then obviously money to value that you're providing. And you're that perfect example of someone who I know for sure is booked in advance with a relatively modest following.
Yeah. And I think the reason for that, I mean, I have to give credit to the guy who mentored me. Like I shared so I did my undergrad in digital marketing, and I interned for a guy at a marketing agency, and he was a really good friend at the time. And then we shared an office, and he'd just basically be doing what I was starting to do, but he was advanced, and he'd be like, come over here, like look at my stuff. And he'd like, give me some projects to do with his clients and stuff. Like he'd give me like a little bit to work on. And a lot of the stuff that he would teach me back then is a lot of the stuff that Hormozy talks about now. Very similar kind of strategies. And the most important thing that I found is to like, and it's, it's quoting Simon Sinek as well. It's like, people don't buy what you sell, they buy why you sell it. And I've been very clear from the start being like, I am just using social media as a tool to be able to communicate with people to help them get their health together and solve their problems. And a lot of the time I'm like, I don't want you to book with me. I don't have time. Like I get guys message me and I'm like, I don't have time to book with you. I'm going for a walk. I'll call you now and we can sort this out in 5 minutes. And I think when you do that at scale for a long time, you develop really good brand equity. Because my whole thing since I started was like, I want every single person who I speak to become a brand ambassador. I'm like, how do I do that? I over deliver and basically be authentic and be someone that people like to work with and show that I genuinely care. And if you do that grassroots shit for ages before you try to sell anything, and you just basically go out and do your purpose and be authentic and do it for the right reasons, people want to give you their money, especially when what you're offering exceeds the value that they're willing to pay. And I think a lot of people don't really understand that because they're just doing what everyone else is doing in business. But what most people are doing in business is not working, which is why they're running the ads or trying to get the call to action in the first place. My whole thing, like I grew up very punk rock, and if anyone told me to do something, I immediately didn't want to do it. Like if you were like, buy this, I'm like, no, get fine. So my whole strategy has been, how can I basically provide so much value to people that I'm not selling a product, I'm not selling a service, they just genuinely know that I want to help them. And then when I do have something for sale, people want to buy it because a lot of the time people buy my book, they're like, hey, I don't actually need this. I just want to support you and give you some money because I really believe in what you're doing. And if you can do that at scale, I mean, yeah, that might not be a, fucking multi-million-dollar business, but it's a good living, and it's a living that at the end of the day, you go to bed and you feel good about what you've done.
Yeah, man, that's a good review. And let's take me for an example. I'm somewhat privy to the business tactics that sellers employ, as I'm in the world of business myself. And I'm ultra suspicious on coaches. But you were one of the people that could convince me that I could be a client. And honestly, bro, you make people feel like they're your friend, and I guess you do become their friend in many instances too. So I have to commend you on how naturally you convinced me. Not that it was your intention to grab me as a client, but you just made me feel like, oh, this guy can help me. This guy has information that others don't have. I think that's very important with you, which I want to talk about today. You have some clear differences in opinion than others in the space, and you back it up with both literature, what we have available, and results. And so for me, that was huge with the fertility protocol that you helped me with. There's so much to talk about here, bro, but let's to start backtrack, starting with your bio. It's an interesting story. Where did you start and how did you get from A to B here today?
Yeah, it's a bit of a long story, and I don't tell the story that much anymore because I think what's more important is what you're doing now than trying to reclaim the same victory lap of your accomplishments. But if you spoke to someone who knew me when I was 18 or 19, like what I do now would be laughable to them because I was the opposite of everything that I stand for now and that I believe in now. I was a musician. I used to get on stage and either play drums or scream in bands that people would call like an emo band or a post-hardcore band, whatever people want to call it. And I wanted to be a career musician. I studied music at the West Australian Academy of Performing Arts, WAPA. And it reached a point in my music career when it became very clear that we weren't going to make a living off it. And at about 24, 25, I was like, okay, let's pack it in, call it a day. We've had a good run. Went back to university and got together all the units that I'd haphazardly half-assed over the years that I was doing music and got a business degree and did digital marketing for a while. And that was going, at the time, fine. Like I was making good money. I was good at what I did. I was helping launch nightclubs and doing some stuff in the fitness space, some stuff in the supplement industry. Background in music, transitioned well into events promotion. And I woke up one day out of the blue with the worst vertigo that I could ever imagine. It was like spinning around on an office chair 50 times. And that didn't let up for years. And that's a very condensed story of a very difficult point in my life. And the most difficult part was that everyone told me that it couldn't be fixed and that my life was basically going to be like that forever. Eventually got diagnosed as vestibular neuritis. So the nerve in the right side of my inner ear, which is like a gyroscope that if you tilt your head to the side, it basically says you're here, but the world's still here. On the right side, the world came with me. So constant disequilibrium, very dizzy, couldn't really function properly. And long story short of some very difficult events, it led me to finding a practitioner who told me that I might be able to fix it through rehabilitation. I went back to university to study science to understand how to try to fix a nerve because everyone told me you couldn't heal a nerve, and found myself with my back against the wall looking down a very long and difficult rehabilitation process. And I decided to pull the trigger on TRT, which at the time was a very foreign thing. But I was in a situation where I was like, I need assistance to get through this very difficult period of my life. I have nothing left to lose. I legitimately thought I wasn't going to make it. So TRT was what allowed me to basically approach rehabilitation the same way that I used to listen to David Goggins, that first podcast with Joe Rogan that he did, just on repeat. And I approached it with that kind of mentality of all or nothing. Came out the other end after employing a protocol that I put together to heal the nerve in the inner ear, where I was able to get my life back and function again. And then I just started helping guys go through their stuff. And I found that originally I was working with more things like peptides and, rehabilitation for balance. And there was a lot more interest and a lot more guys needing support with TRT. So because I had a background in science, I understood how to read literature. I didn't want to go down the original path, which I'd set to go down, which was neuropsychiatry, because the more I studied it, the more I became disenfranchised with the psychiatric model of mental illness, and developed a very strong passion for not just the biological effects of hormones, but the psychological and behavioral effects of testosterone. And I have been coaching guys on their TRT since 2019 full time. In that time, I've written a couple of books. I've got a third one due to come out soon. Spoke at the Olympia last year. I'm speaking at the Olympia again this year. Done a few lectures on YouTube that have racked up a few views that people have enjoyed. And I guess what I did was I saw a space that needed some knowledge, but it also needed someone to explain the knowledge in a way that people can understand. So I just made lectures like what I watched at university, but explained them in a way that made people not feel like an idiot and to be able to understand what was going on with their health. And now I get paid to have the conversations that I used to have for free with people anyway, because it's what I like talking about. It's what I'm passionate about. And it's been amazing. I've been able to help and coach thousands of guys to, fix their health, dial in their HRT, troubleshoot some of the really niche issues that guys are having with their hormone replacement therapy. And it's led me to the point that I've been fortunate enough that people refer to me as an expert in the space.
Great review, bro. And I didn't know this. I didn't know you were formally trained in science, which I think we can both agree is not critical, but it definitely helps because being able to cipher through literature, self-taught, there are some people in the space that are pretty good at it, but oftentimes they're misled. They seem to not be able to understand how to read a paper properly, and that's causing a bit of confusion in the space. But going back to your ailment, which I wasn't aware of either, bro, how did testosterone help heal you with that ailment?
So there's a two-part factor to this. One was the recompensation, another was the actual healing of the nerve. So when it came to healing the nerve, I did a combination of PPC 157. If I'd known about cerebrolysin at the time, I would have done cerebrolysin, but at the time I just used a very high dose of desiccated brain extract. I actually reached out to Liver King, who wasn't Liver King at the time, and he gave me a massive discount when he heard about what I was using it for, which was very generous of him. I don't watch any of his content anymore, but he helped me out when I needed it. And I also used PQQ, ubiquinol, and lion's mane mushroom and microdose psilocybin all together. And I basically pulled a shotgun approach. A lot of people would be like, oh, let's use this one at a time and see what works. I said, I'm going to use it all together. And if it works, I don't care which one worked because maybe it was a synergy. But the important part of healing that nerve was creating an environment which wasn't so stressed. And when you're dizzy for multiple years straight to the point that like you can't walk without steadying on walls and you can't look over your shoulder at oncoming traffic and you're constantly off balance, your psychological health deteriorates very rapidly. I was very anxious, very stressed, very afraid. I couldn't even watch a movie because the eyes darting would make the world spin. And testosterone provided a buffer towards stress biologically, created a more anabolic environment where the body could actually heal and rest and digest properly. But most importantly, when I was given a 1 to 2 year timeline for rehabilitation for trying to get the other side of the ear to be able to compensate for this side, it was something that I went for. I needed that exogenous dose of courage to be able to take a proper swing at it. And I didn't think it was going to work. I just wanted to go down swinging. And fortunately, it did work. But what the testosterone did is it gave me a foundation that I was able to apply myself in a way that I had never really applied myself to a stressor before. I would go down to like the park oval and do these exercises. So like you'd like run backwards and then do a 360 and run backwards, or you'd like run with your eyes closed and you do all this stuff to like trigger the nerve to basically send the signal that it needed healing. But that process was basically like, looking at the demon and triggering the thing that's making you uncomfortable. And I did that for hours a day, every day for, multiple months over a year. And I didn't make any progress for the first 6 months. And I think that if it wasn't for the higher testosterone levels, which I was giving myself, I wouldn't have had the courage, determination, resilience to be able to do that.
Awesome, bro. I wanted to find a couple things. So prior to you using the exogenous testosterone, did you have low testosterone prior to that?
I think if anyone knew me from 18 to 25, it was very clear that I did. I was very effeminate in my mannerisms, how I dressed. I was also in a band and it was part of the look and the identity, but I went through I never tested my testosterone levels until I was about 21, 22. But prior to that, I'm sure that I would have had, very suboptimal testosterone levels for a young man. when I did check my levels right before I started, which was, I'd already been very dizzy and broken down for a long time. My free testosterone was just scraping the bottom of the range. So maybe not like debilitatingly low, but definitely not optimal. Low enough that I was very cautious about pulling the trigger in terms of if it would make a difference. And prior to that, when I was 21, 22, I think my free testosterone in picomole per liter, which the reference range at the moment is 200 to 600. It used to be much higher. I think it was like 400, 450, which is not terrible, but for someone in their early 20s who was living well and looking after themselves, it was pretty poor. So it was always low, but it would. And this is why I'm such an advocate for TRT when guys are in need of an intervention in their lives when they're not doing well. My levels may not have been, low enough on paper to warrant, a medical diagnosis of hypogonadism. But when I was in a situation where I was like, I need exogenous help to be able to get through where I'm at, it was either TRT or it was, dexamphetamine or other psychiatric medications. And I weighed them all up. I look at them mechanistically and, from a scientific standpoint, because I'd learned how to read studies. And I looked at it and said, well, mechanistically, testosterone suits the direction that I need to push myself in more than any of these drugs. And it doesn't come with all the neurotoxic downregulation that comes from cranking these neurotransmitters through the sky. So I was at a level where guys, I guess, would typically start to maybe show a little bit of symptoms, but I was in a situation where I needed to actually have a lot of courage and resilience, which I didn't have an ounce of at the time.
And this dose that you took, was this a super physiological dose specific for rehabilitation or upper end of normal, quote unquote?
So at the time, there was no information on this. Like there was Jay Campbell's first book, and it was like the first edition of that, which I think was about a 50-minute audiobook. And there was one doctor in Perth who would prescribe it, but we didn't know anything about, optimal protocols. There was not really anything on YouTube at this point. So I was prescribed 250 every 14 days, which at the time I did and had a great few days. And then I had a pretty abysmal, I was reading the half-life of the medication and I was looking at the effects I'd had and I was like, this isn't right. Went back to my doctor. He pushed it up to 250 every 10 days, which was 175 per week. I kind of worked out to split it into 2 doses at that point. And through that entire process, through the majority of that process, I was on 175 milligrams a week. And then towards the end of it, when I started to educate myself and, learn from a bunch of great guys at the time online, Dr. Keith Nichols, Dr. Jim Meehan, who very sadly passed away last month, John Chrysler, he also helped me for a little bit with this. I pushed my levels up to 210 milligrams per week at that point. And that put me, I'm a little bit of a low responder. So on 250 a week, I get on what the average guy would get on about 200 a week. Like, I'm a blunt responder biologically, but it put me to a free testosterone of about 1,000 to 1,200 in the units of 200 to 600, which off the top of my head is picomole per liter. And this, I was also very cautious of not going into like steroid cycle territory because I was very fragile. So I was steering on the side of conservatism, and I was also wanting to not dysregulate my nervous system because it was very important that I could rest and recover. And I was concerned that if I pushed the dose up too high, that it could impact some of that underlying state of disequilibrium. I was very much not doing well at the time. So I think that dose for me was absolutely optimal.
And you changed to a bi-weekly split, or how did you end up dosing it in the end?
So we were using those Primatest and preloaded syringes. So when I first started doing it, I used like the 18 gauge 1.5 inch needle that came with it for a quad injection. Bro, I was like, I had to get everyone to leave the house. I'm like sweating. I'm like fucking terrified. I think I stuck it in like that far and injected it. It all leaked out my leg. And then I was reading about how people were using insulin syringes, and then I'm trying to draw it out of like the little hole. And it was just a nightmare at first. But once I worked out how to transfer it into a sterile vial from reading Jay Campbell's work, and I also had a guidance call from Dr. John Chrysler. He was doing international advice at the time. They both kind of guided me towards being like, look, when we look at the science and when we look at where testosterone peaks in the body, twice a week is far more advantageous than once a week. So that got me straight on to twice a week. So I think I only did those big irregular shots maybe like 3, 4, 5 times. And then I was straight onto the bi-weekly shots. And there was a period in Australia where there was a primatestin shortage. We didn't have primatestin for like a year and a half, so we all had to swap to Sustanon. And because of the propionate and phenylpropionate esters, I found it was better to do that every other day. I just felt more stable. And then I was staying on every other day. I did 50 milligrams every other day for maybe the first 3 years I was on TRT.
50 milligrams every other day.
So 175 a week.
That 175 a week. Okay, cool. So after this testosterone regime, as well as the other medications, some over the counter, some not, was there anything else? Any other medications?
I was pretty anti-pharmaceutical after dropping out of psychiatry. BPC was the one that I used for the nerve recovery. And originally, I'd actually wanted to get a stem cell infusion. And I actually booked in with this doctor in Perth. And he was booked out for ages. And a lot of this has come into how I operate my business now, because a lot of people helped me. And this guy, he took the appointment, and I went in to see him, and he was a South African guy. He goes, "I can't help you." I'm like, "Great." I'm like, "Why am I here?" And he's like, "I had what you had." And I was like, "Oh." And I was like, "So what can I do?" And he goes, "Look, I can do a stem cell infusion for you. It's going to cost," I can't remember how much it cost, but significantly more money than I had at the time. I mean, at the time, I just got to the point that I could work 3 days a week for a not-for-profit doing digital marketing, but like on like a minimum wage role. But he was like, "Look, there's this peptide called BPC 157, and this will give you the majority of the benefits of a stem cell infusion for a fraction of the price." And I said, "Look, I'm on TRT. Is that going to help?" And he goes, "That's the best combination for it." And he goes, "I can't prescribe it to you, but if you go to this clinic here, they'll be able to prescribe it to you." So this was back in like 2018, 2017. And so I called up the clinic, and they took me to the pharmacy, and they were like, "Look, we've only done this a few times before. Are you sure you want this?" And I didn't really know much about it. Peptides weren't really much of a thing back then. And I was like, "Look, yeah, I've got nothing to lose here. I want to give this a try." And it was when I put the BPC in at the end of the rehabilitation, that's what made the process very good. When I first started TRT, we were all using aromatase inhibitors as well. So I was using like an anastrozole, like quarter of a tablet twice a week or something like that. And it was when I started to realize that, my joints were a bit sore, that, I think when I started doing a shot every fortnight and every week, I probably needed it. But when I was doing it twice a week, every other day, that became redundant. And I found that when I dropped the anastrozole out and put the BPC in, that's when I started making some really good progress. And I think I ran through maybe 2 20 milligram vials of BPC. I used it for almost 6 months. And that's what got me to the point of just using TRT from then on out. I mean, I experimented with pregnenolone, DHEA, thyroid, HCG, GH, all that kind of stuff in replacement dosing as part of my education and self-experimentation. But for the majority of my time on HRT, which is now coming up to 8 years, I've basically just been on TRT.
Remarkable, bro. This rise in your popularity must be quite recent then, like you said, since 2020, because at 2018, you're still somewhat struggling. I won't get into BPC 157 today, but it is noteworthy that some of the ailments people have healed from, when they throw that in, it's almost like magic. I mean, I've seen people that I trust their anecdote, that have had decade-long plus injuries. All of a sudden, 2 months later, it's gone completely. So that's just something I wanted to mention. And I know you've obviously seen that too with clients and in yourself. But are you now completely healed?
There's still scars. So like, I don't think the nerve will ever fully heal. So if you turn all the lights out, I can't walk in a straight line. I balance very strongly with my eyes. So I still do things that push my balance. Like I'm like, I've been doing Muay Thai for like 3 or 4 years, and I'm worse than someone who's done it for like 12 weeks. Like I have a very poor internal sense of balance, but it doesn't impact my day-to-day life. And I'm definitely not 100% in terms of balance as to where I was before the injury, but I have compensated for that in all other aspects of my mental health, physical health, resilience, that I'm definitely a little bit damaged in that way, but I am so much stronger in all other ways that I've worked on with self-development. And I continue to challenge that with things like yoga and specific training programs to help with the disequilibrium. But yeah, I balance more with my eyes than most people would. But I'm okay.
Man, I did not know this, that you had struggled that much. Do you find that it gives you more compassion for clients now, having that experience?
Yeah, the main reason I do this is because I don't want people to go through what I went through, where everyone tells you that you can never recover and that you're fucked. There's the most difficult point that I had in that rehabilitation was when I couldn't get a diagnosis, and then I finally got a diagnosis, but that diagnosis came with the tag of this is something that's irreparable. Having no hope is very scary. And for people who've been there, suicide's not easy. So when you get to a point that you have lost all hope, but you're also not capable of pulling that trigger, it's a scary point, and it's a horrible point to be at. I became, when I got through this, people can believe what they want about God or spiritualism or the universe or whatever, but this was my rite of passage. This was I had a very privileged upbringing, and this was the hardest thing. I was not prepared for this. I went through hell, and I very strongly believe that, I went through something that other people couldn't have got through. It absolutely brought me to my knees, and my purpose since then, the only thing that I have cared about since I got through that was helping other people go through their shit. I don't really care about anything else. It's one of the reasons why I haven't really gone much into the business side of this, the YouTube stuff, trying to make money. Like, I have purely just been doing consulting calls all day, every day for years, because that's all I've cared about. And that to me has been a massive factor in this. Is I have a huge amount of empathy for my clients in terms of what they're going through, because I've been there. But it's also showing them to go, well, before this happened to me, I was the weakest person I probably knew. And I have a very, it's cliche, but if I could get through it, anyone could get through it. And that's why when I first heard that David Goggins podcast on Rogan's, when I heard him from where he started to where he got to, that resonated with me so strongly, because I was like, this is, people hear stuff like that and they go, oh yeah, that's someone else, or someone else could be like that. But, when you actually get backed into that corner and it's make or break, and it's kind of just you against you, and hope is minimalistic. And I wanted to be the person that I needed for other people, because I didn't have that guy when I was going through it. And that to me, I mean, when you're a musician and all you want to be is a touring musician and it doesn't work out and you have to go work your day job, that kind of blows, because you just find the thing that sucks the least to go, okay, I'm just going to do this and make money, but it feels empty. It hasn't been since doing music that I've found anything that gives me this much fulfillment and purpose and passion and meaning in my life. So I absolutely love my job, like truly, truly love it. And I would have the same calls that I have all day with my clients for free. I often do. When people can't afford to work with me, I'll find a way to make it happen, because it's meaningful. And I think that my clients appreciate that, because I hear them. And a lot of the time they need to be heard. And one of the most important things when a guy's going through struggles, in my experience, is to honor that and to be like, look, man, like, that's the fact that you're getting through this and you've got through this up until this point is admirable. But the ball has landed in a steaming pile of shit and you still got to play it. And I think that's the most important thing when it comes to working with men, is honoring their struggle, but not letting them have a victim mentality, because it's like, yeah, well, suck it up because it sucks, but you've got to get through this just like everyone else does. And I think finding that middle ground of like tough love and compassion and care, but also accountability, is what a lot of these guys need.
Yeah, man, you definitely strike a good balance as I don't like to use these words because we know some of the phonies within this newfound niche at the moment, the masculine coaches or the man coaches, right? But you really do strike a good balance, because you address both the mindset, but also the physiological stuff, which seems to be underplayed at times, right? What can I say about that, bro? I'm envious of you that you have this calling that you're very sure about. I definitely don't have that anymore. Hence why I'm doing this podcast thing, right? But I will say one thing I can relate to, the suicide thing. When you brought that up, bro, when you're on the cusp of it, right? Where you don't really want to keep going through the pain, but then you don't want to die. It's like this weird kind of paradox, right? For me, it was, can you believe, of all the drugs I've taken, it was abusing aromatase inhibitors. I'm talking about being completely happy one day and then putting a deadline on my date of death the next. That is how severe this abuse of aromatase inhibitors were. But, you know, to preface for everyone, I abused the absolute hell out of them for a very long time at very high doses. And that was because I had prepubescent gynecomastia. I was fearful of it coming back, right? Anywho, now I understand why you're the type of person that you are now. So we fast forward a little, you get at least better enough to start your business, let's say. When did you decide, hey, I'm going to give up my day job and I'm going to go into this full time? Or was it a natural transition?
Probably a bit of both. You'll appreciate this story. I'll tell the story on this podcast. So after I finished, there was a point where I could do more than 3 days worth of work a week, and I wanted to kind of get my life back. I was offered a disability pension, but I refused to take it. And I did a lot of mindfulness. Like I was very into meditation because when you're dizzy, you can't really do anything else. So I got very interested in, and I got very good at meditation. And one day, so as part of this not-for-profit, I was teaching, I was basically teaching people on the dole, like basic skills, like, you know, how to like do like basic woodwork, how to like basic welding, how to apply for jobs. Like I was just I was the supervisor that you have to go and report to if you've been on Centrelink, like government welfare for a while in Australia, and you have to come and hang out with me for a day. So like I'd have people like coming down from meth all the time, like just basically I was like their supervisor. And one day I was teaching a guy how to apply for jobs on Seek. And I was like, well, I'm going to put my qualifications in and see what comes up. And then at the top, it was like 3 minutes ago. It was mindfulness meditation like company, and it was a marketing manager. And I was like, I'll be back. And I went outside, called the guy, and I was basically like, I'm the perfect candidate for this. Give me this job. And he was like, okay. So I came and met him, and that's the job that I was doing before I did this. As part of I was always very placid growing up when I was younger. And I was I was involuntarily placid, kind of like an incel, but a pussy. Like I didn't stand up to people because I was too timid, not because I was disciplined in control of my temper. I just didn't have a temper to exert. So during the COVID lockdowns, I found out the guy who was running the company wasn't doing the right thing by me when it came to the compensation we were supposed to be receiving from the government. He was being quite selfish and deceitful with it. I'd also happened to be kind of experimenting with microdosing Tren at the time, and gave him a call and maybe didn't articulate things as politely as I should have, and lost my job. So I just built a house. I just built a house. I was living in this new house, and I was like, fuck, like I'm kind of screwed here. Like, I mean, I'm going to have to sell the house unless I find another job very quickly. And I'd been doing these consults on the side just for donations. Like on like a Thursday night and a Saturday, I just do 1 or 2. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to go to bed tonight. I'm going to make my availability, 2 or 3 sessions a day. And I worked out and I went, well, if I do 2 consults a day, I can make the same money that I was making before, just charge what people would pay just a regular health professional, like $90, $100 for the session. And I'm just going to make my availability full time. And then tomorrow I'm going to message people out and say, hey, like I'm going to do this until I find another job. Woke up the next day, I was booked out, and I've been booked out ever since. So maybe halfway in between a natural progression, but it was, I was just basically going, look, this is, and at the time, like health coaching wasn't a thing. I'd read Chris Kress's book, Unconventional Medicine, which is a fantastic book. And it talked about this future concept of medicine that people will work with health coaches rather than with doctors all the time. And they'll work with health coaches on a more frequent basis, on a higher volume basis to stay in good health rather than waiting until the wheels fall off and then going to see the doctor and trying to salvage what they have left. And I looked at that and I was like, that, from what I went through, that makes a hell of a lot of sense. So I was very interested in this role of I was just like, I'm going to be a TRT health coach. I just made it up. And, I don't want to sound like I was some kind of like great inventor of a concept, but I didn't take it from anyone. I was just like, I'm going to I think there's demand for this service. I'm going to do it. And when people ask me what I do, I'm going to say I'm a health coach. And when people say, what the hell is that? I'm just going to be like, look, I just help people in a way kind of between a personal trainer and a dietitian and a doctor, kind of halfway in between. And I've been doing it ever since. And it was from that day until this day, my days look very similar. I wake up, look after myself properly, get myself right. I do as many calls as I can to keep to keep a good quality of service. And then I basically do as little of anything else as possible. If I have more time in the day, I do calls. Once I got to the point that I was getting a bunch of emails, I hired someone to answer my emails so I could do more calls. And yeah, I've been doing that ever since. And one thing that I think has given me a lot of expertise is I have spent more time, effort, energy on the phone to these guys for an hour per session, hearing them out, working with them on their shit, and helping them get resolutions for their problems.
You deserve it, bro. Now I got story time for you. We're both, you're from Australia or originally from New Zealand, was it? I forgot.
Born in Sydney, but grew up in Perth. Yep.
Okay. So randomly, both of us from Perth. We're both now not in Perth. But at the time, I was, let's say, semi-retired and I was looking for something to do. And I had on a forum, since I was 15, been a pseudonymous personality talking about similar things, probably more in the PED world, but TRT came about because it's just something you do as a cruise, right? And I figured I might do this thing. I think I know a thing or two. I'm well read enough to be able to get clients. And truthfully speaking, there were some people in my clique that I could help until I came across you and you convinced me not to do it because I figured this guy knows way more than me and I feel like a phony. I feel like I'm not well read enough in the stuff that bores me. And that was actually the biochemistry and some of the cellular biology. And I figured if someone comes along that asks me those questions, I'm not going to be able to hang. Some of the pharmacology, some of the pharmacokinetics, I can, but it's very surface level. And there's some terminology here that I'm not going to be able to even know the definition. And I'm going to feel like a phony. And that was because I had one consult with you and I was very suspicious prior to. Honestly, I was like, I just need to get a TRT script. However, sign me up. I'll be the client you need me to be. But then I heard you and I was like, this guy, he knows his shit. And I felt like I was pretty well read at the time. I mean, there is so much to read. But as you name these health practitioners, Chris Kresser, Dr. John Kreisler, I can see that you've spent a lot of time with your head in the books or online. Like I know you've put thousands of hours because I have, and I don't know as much as you, so I think the reason you got booked out immediately, bro, is because I definitely know that there is no one in Australia that has the accumulation of knowledge and the social skill set that you do. So it would have been very easy for you to convert these clients because I'll be honest, it was very easy for me in the beginning too. So I can't imagine how easy it was for you. I stopped because A, yes, I didn't need the money, but B, because of you. You convinced me not to do it. Can you imagine?
That's, I did not know that. That's interesting. I mean, it's very humbling. But I think it's also an important point. I mean, I only speak on topics that I feel like I'm an expert on. Like I often say to guys, because people disagree with me all the time on the internet, and that's great. I think it's great that people have different opinions. But I say to people, I'm like, look, if this is a topic that I feel like I have expertise on, I will debate anyone, anytime with no preparation on any topic because the topics that I speak about, I know inside and out, theoretically practice everything else. But I don't speak on anything else other than those topics. Like when people want to speak about things like advanced cardiology, when they want to speak about female hormone replacement, when they want to speak about gut health, I'm like, I have some ideas, but I'm not going to speak with any kind of definitive knowledge because I see other people in the space trying to paint too broad of a brush with, kind of coming into my field and how cringy it looks. And I'm like, I never want to do that. So I think it's, I think it shows good humility that you were able to be like, okay. Because one of the things I get very frustrated at in the space, not that and when I say frustrated, I mean purely because my clients and they have harm happen to them. is that there's a whole bunch of people in the space who are speaking with authority on things that they don't know enough about to speak on. And when someone's sick and when someone's coming to you being like, I need help with this, if they're going to solicit that service from you, I think it's really important that you're like, I am the guy who can fix this. You can trust me. I know what I'm doing. And I think there's a lot of guys who know that they don't know what they're doing, but they put up the facade that they do because they want to make money or they want to be that guy. So I think it's great that you were able to take a step back with some humility and go, hang on, like maybe this isn't my thing, or maybe this isn't my thing right now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to name names here. It's just not the kind of persona that I want to portray. But I'll be honest with you, bro. I can objectively say that I know a lot more than some of the popular personalities in the TRT space. But I feel inferior because I set a very high standard for myself. And I can name the people that I know to be experts. So I know enough to spot the experts. You are one of them. And I would say you probably know this person. I think it is Gillette Health or something. Do you know this person? Gillette Health?
Kyle Gillette, yeah.
Him?
Yep.
Do you agree with the way that he interprets or breaks things down in the hormone space? I would guess that you do, or at least have very similar opinions on things.
So I've got a list of I've got a free FAQ going up next week, and in the back I've got a list of recommended providers, and Kyle's one of them. Kyle and I have been speaking for a while on and off on Instagram, and we did a podcast a while ago. The thing that I love about this space, like when you get to a point where you're at the top of the game, is that I'm sure that I disagree with all my colleagues on like 5 to 10% of subject matter. I am 100% sure of that. And I'm sure that there would be things that we would disagree on with, and I would probably agree to disagree on them because there's just different interpretations and different, clinical settings that we see. But Kyle's someone who, when I see his approach and how he looks at the body, we did a whole podcast not talking about milligrams of anything. We just did a whole podcast on mental health, lifestyle, self-care, like health coaching side of things. I think he's got a fantastic perspective. And I always say to people, look, like these are the people who I would trust to go, hey, go and see them and get treated by them. I'd put my name on it. And yeah, he's in the back of my book as one of those guys, but I'm sure that people would find something. I'm not sure specifically on what topics we'd disagree on, but I'm sure there'd be one or two. But I think it's really important that, and I was maybe guilty of this when I first started in the space. I would fixate on the things that I disagreed on with people, and that was all I cared about. But for me, like, I think that a whole bunch of this stuff, we're still learning. This field is in its infancy. And I really believe in the term firm beliefs held loosely rather than loose beliefs held firmly, because I'm very firm in what I believe, but if you can change my mind, like, please do. And I've changed my mind on a bunch of stuff. So yeah, he's someone who I think is a fantastic member of the community, and I think his clinic is going very well, which is fantastic to see.
That's cool. Not surprising. I don't know the guy personally, but you and him are people that I spend a lot of time listening and reading the content, right? It's pretty easy for me to sit here being the interviewer without having anything to criticize. But I guess now I want to ask a few questions that are not asked online. I figured if I'm going to do this podcast thing, if I have to ask the same questions, what's the point? Like, there really is none. There are people, like you said, there's Huberman, there's Joe Rogan. There are people that speak eloquently. They already have massive followings. What kind of value am I adding to the scene if I'm going to ask the same questions over and over? And it's great. It's great that there are a lot of questions answered now that weren't 10 years ago that are very helpful. But there are a couple of questions that I'd like to ask. They're very novel, not in any particular order. We'll start with the HCG thing, but something a little more esoteric. You probably know of him, Dr. Michael Scally, I wouldn't say friend of mine. I was a client of his. He's very dry. He doesn't care. He's just, he's an older guy, but he is very evidence-based. And if there's no evidence for it, he just completely disregards anecdote unless it's overwhelming. But he sent me this paper of all of these other novel prescriptions for HCG and other parts of the body that it can affect. And that actually got me concerned rather than like, oh, cool. I was like, whoa, there's these other receptors that HCG can affect, completely irrelevant to what you'd think within TRT. Are these some things you know about? Like, so what are some of the novel risks with HCG that a man who's considering it for backfilling the pathways, or even if he has to use it for fertility, what are some of the other novel concerns with HCG use?
I had the same reaction as yourself. So I've got for anyone who kind of wants to see more of a educational presentation on my thoughts on this, I've got Beyond TRT on YouTube has a whole lecture on HCG as well as a book on my website. Same title, same information, free lecture on YouTube, or you can buy it for $29 off my site. But look, the current use of HCG in the TRT community scares me a little bit. I think people are a bit reckless with what we don't know about HCG. So HCG is a female pregnancy hormone. It is not bioidentical to men. Now, I can already sense someone in the comments getting on their high horse saying, well, men make it in fractional amounts, so just like nandrolone, it's technically bioidentical. Not in these doses, it's not. And most importantly, it's also something that's not elevated for prolonged periods in women. It's part of the pregnancy cycle. So we don't really know what HCG does in men outside of the fact that it stimulates the Leydig cells. We know that it binds with the LH receptor, but we don't really know what it does systemically. And you're completely correct. There are LH receptors throughout the central nervous system and in the brain. We don't actually really know what they do. So the argument for using HCG is going, well, we don't know what happens if you leave these dormant. It could be bad. And I'd come in saying, well, we also don't know what happens if you stimulate the LH receptors with a female pregnancy hormone long-term, which is going to be better. So I refer to the evidence-based idea of being like, well, every study on TRT that has ever shown benefit ever has all been done without HCG. That's the most important thing, I think. But I have found in practice, working with guys on this, that I think that HCG is inherently feminizing. I think it has inherently feminizing properties, whether it is through the specific binding to the LH receptor or whether it's through intracellular conversion to estrogen. I don't know. I don't care, because we're never really probably going to find out in our lifetimes. No one's going to pay for that study to work out what's actually happening. But what we do know about the differences between LH and HCG is that they don't do the same stuff. And this idea that HCG is an LH mimetic is a term that I have a big gripe with. And I don't usually like getting bent out of shape over terms and stuff because it's just language, but mimetic means to mimic. It means to do the same thing. If this is the case, then LSD is a serotonin mimetic because it binds to the serotonin receptor and activates it. Now, if you take some 5-HTP versus if you take a tab of acid, you're going to have a very, very different experience. It's not a mimetic. It's an agonist. So HCG is not mimicking LH. It might be replacing some of the functions of LH, but what else is it doing? We have no fucking idea. And I think that's really important because it's like, well, do you want to be the guinea pig of this? You get one shot at this. Do you really want to find out? And my argument is maybe not. I also don't think that the idea of testosterone replacement therapy is as appealing if it also comes with the caveat going, oh, you're also dependent on this female pregnancy hormone, which we haven't studied long-term in men. It's not shelf stable. You got to keep it in the fridge. It's kind of hard to get in some countries. And if you don't take it, you're going to have all these systemic problems. One of the most important things that guys need to look at is that exogenous testosterone administration does not shut down upstream hormones. I've done lectures on this. I've explained this in my book. People go on Wikipedia, they pull up an illustrative diagram and they take it literally. It's a diagram. It's not a river of hormones that flows down like Donkey Kong throwing barrels at old school Mario where it just trickles down the pathways. It doesn't work like that. And most importantly, when you actually work with this in practice, no exaggeration, because I work with multiple clinics now and my clients, I do between 50 and 150 blood work reviews a week. And that's not a flex. That's just literally the number. We check DHEA every single time we initiate someone going on TRT. And I did a lecture 4 years ago saying I've never seen a TRT induced DHEA deficiency, and I stand by that today. you could already have low DHEA levels due to age, but if you put HCG in there, it's not going to bring them up to optimal levels. It just doesn't work like that. It's a completely, it was a hypothesis put forward by Dr. Chrysler. And it was a hypothesis based on saying when you get to the end of a cycle and you feel burnt out, it's because of depletion of pregnenolone and DHEA. I think, based on my observations, that I'm going to book a podcast with Vigorous Steve to talk about this because I think we both agree with this, and I think he sees more of this than me, is that I think that the supraphysiological doses of non-bioidentical anabolic steroids absolutely dysregulate pregnenolone and DHEA production because they impact the signaling from the pituitary to the thyroid and the adrenals. TRT doesn't do this. And people keep citing this study going, oh, well, when we put exogenous testosterone into a man, there's less progesterone, pregnenolone, and DHEA produced in the testicles. Yeah, locally in the testicular cells, for sure. But these hormones are not primarily made in the testicles. DHEA is primarily an adrenal hormone. But most importantly, in practice, we just don't see this. Now, the other caveat to this is that for guys who get old enough to have age-related hormone decline, and it's not due to endocrine disruption and these issues that young men are facing, if you're old enough to have a decline in testosterone production, you're probably old enough to have a decline in thyroid, DHEA, pregnenolone, progesterone, melatonin, growth hormone. But it's not going on TRT that caused that. It's that you actually have a multifactorial hormone deficiency based on the fact that you've just gotten older. If your testicles have cocked it, maybe your adrenals and thyroid aren't optimal anymore either. I've got a podcast with Dr. Keith Nichols. We do a 2-part podcast going into all the nitty-gritty of that. So I think the HCG thing, like the other thing for me is that I think it's very telling when you look at all the top doctors and the top practitioners and the top people in the space and go, what do they use personally? None of them use HCG. I think HCG is something that clinics sell like fries and a Coke with the burger. You know, your HCG and your anastrozole, we can triple the profit margin per client. It's easy to sell 100 people 3 things and 300 people 1 thing from a profit standpoint. It's very easy to use fear-mongering tactics to shut down the prefrontal cortex, create a fear response, and create an impulse buy. Go, oh, well, if you don't get the HCG, you're going to, your balls are going to shrivel up and you're going to fuck with all these hormones. You're going to be infertile, so you better add it on just in case. Easy, unethical sell to make for these clinics. And it's become something which, I think a very dangerous myth is this idea that TRT, which has been very well studied, very well documented of the benefits, people are saying that it's now mandatory to take a female pregnancy hormone, which has no place in male biology, and saying that it's a must. And I just have a middle ground and go, I don't think it's a must, but I also think that there could be issues with not stimulating the LH receptors long term. I think that's also viable. But is it better to stimulate it with HCG or to leave it alone? I'm going to steer on the side of caution. I mean, we know that HCG stimulates cyclic AMP 8 times more than luteinizing hormone. And that makes sense. If a woman's pregnant, if she starts growing a fetus inside of her, it's going to use a shit ton more energy than before she was pregnant. So upregulating these energetic processes in the body makes sense for HCG. Is that suitable for a man? Is that going to cause benefits long term? What else does this do? We don't know. So I steer on the side of caution. I don't like it.
If you've just started TRT, it is completely normal to feel overwhelmed and confused. There's a lot of new territory to cover, and there is a lot of conflicting information. I wrote TRT 101 so that you can have everything that you need to know in an instruction manual in one place that you can refer back to, that you can have all the questions answered before they even come up. TRT 101 is my best practice approach for TRT from start to finish, and it contains everything that you need to avoid all the challenges and pitfalls that I've seen come up in my clients over the last 5 years. You can check it out via the link below.
Very good review, bro. Now, I understood all that, and I feel proud that I could, but there may be some more in the general audience that don't. And I think within the general audience that understand a little, where they get fearful is that they fear that if they don't feel these pathways that they think are low because they're only taking testosterone, is that they'll be symptomatic in the future, meaning they might not have the same cognition or they'll suffer their libido. And then I think some of that nocebo almost causes them to feel it. Like, oh, my libido now, I'm not taking HCG and DHEA and pregnenolone. This doctor said I need to. And I see that. And I have to be honest, I was a patient of that myself, at least until I tried HCG and I figured, no, this is objectively worse for me. But I guess what you're saying here is that we definitely don't know, and we probably won't know for at least in this lifetime, which seems reasonable. But there are some people that you have seen objectively do benefit from the dosing of either one or all of these other ancillaries to TRT, DHEA, pregnenolone, HCG. I guess my question here is, how do you make that call? Is there something on the blood work? Is there something that they tell you with regards to symptoms where you figure, I've seen this before, I'm going to try this first? Could you take me through your system here? I know that's a really loaded question, but if you could.
Yeah. So when we're looking at this really highlights the need for me, and it's something that I preach all the time, is the importance of regular comprehensive blood work. Guessing with this stuff is asinine, because serum blood hormone concentrations, they're not perfectly accurate, but they're a pretty damn good proxy, especially for pregnenolone sulfate, DHEA sulfate, T3, T4, etc. So there will be guys who, when we look at hormone deficiencies, guys can have a DHEA deficiency, guys can have a thyroid deficiency, guys can have testosterone deficiencies, guys can have these in isolation, or guys can have these all together. And this is why it's so important that we don't make these blanket statements, which is that everyone on TRT needs pregnenolone, DHEA, because the pathways get shut down. That is objectively false, because if that was true, everyone who went on TRT would be low on these hormones, which they're not. I would say the majority aren't deficient. But then also everyone who took these hormones in the right dose would receive benefit from them. That's also not true. So in practice, it's just it's a falsehood. But the important thing to understand is that some guys do need pregnenolone, DHEA, T3, T4, or even growth hormone, depending on what's going on with their individual endocrine system. So if someone has aged, if someone's got primary hypogonadism, they may also, and the older they are, the more likely they will also have deficiencies in DHEA, pregnenolone, and thyroid. And it's very important that we run the blood work rather than assuming, and then we can simply look at the blood, look at their symptoms, and go, okay, the DHEA is low enough to be causing symptoms. You have the symptoms of low DHEA, and then now we need to treat this just like TRT. We start with a conservative dose to bring you into the, to increase your levels significantly, but not to the point that we blow them through the roof. We give it time to settle in. We run a follow-up blood test, and we titrate up or down as needed. Same as you would with TRT. The thing with HCG is that, so what I've written in my book is that if I take 100 guys on TRT and they all go on HCG, statistically, what I've observed, and my friend Dr. Adam Hotchkiss says the same thing as well, and he works with a bunch of guys too, is that about a third of guys will feel like us, just everything's worse. A third of guys will feel no different. Their testicles will just get bigger, which I'd call a positive response. And then a third of guys will feel fantastic. They'll go, this is the best thing in the world. The thing that I have found, and then so this creates the argument that some guys need HCG on TRT and some guys don't. I disagree with this. I think that this is a little step too short of the actual answer to this, because in my experience, every guy who has needed HCG has had an underlying issue that I think the HCG is band-aiding. And I think the increase in cyclic AMP, which is basically increasing the energy metabolism, is offsetting for something underneath that's slowing it down. Because every single guy who's come to me and said, I need HCG. If I stop taking HCG, I feel like shit. I can't function without HCG. It's the only thing that makes my testosterone work properly. They've either had liver disease, they've had dysfunction with their gallbladder, they've had hypothyroidism, even if it was just subclinical or just mild activity of Hashimoto's, or their testosterone dose hasn't been high enough. And in all of these cases, I've been able to get to the root cause of the issue and fix it with bioidentical things that are meant to be in their body to get them feeling the same way as when they were on HCG. I think that if a guy knows all this stuff and he's like, well, I want to take HCG because I'm willing to roll the dice for potential, maybe it causes cancer, maybe it causes issues with genetic expression. I don't know how taking a female pregnancy hormone impacts epigenetic expression, but I don't think it's going to be positive. especially if we're trying to improve the masculinity pathways and the androgenicity pathways in the body. But that's just a very, that's just an opinion. That's not science. But I like to get guys to the point that they don't need HCG to feel good, because it's not shelf stable. It's got a short half-life. You can't really travel with it. Like, it's something that you don't want to feel tethered to. And then if guys still want to take it to plump up their nuts and, have big testicles, then cool. As long as they understand that it's not something that they should have to take, then that's their choice. Their body, their choice. They can do what they like. But I have not found anyone who actually needs HCG. They thought they did. They had an underlying issue. But when it comes to the pregnenolone, DHEA, T3, T4 stuff, not only do I find that HCG doesn't actually influence those levels, but it's also something that if you have a deficiency in those hormones, you need to actually optimize and treat them separately, regardless of whether you use HCG or not.
Very good answer once again. I certainly feel some relief that I probably don't need HCG. In fact, I'm probably benefiting from my decision not to continue taking it. Remember, I've been on TRT now for nearly 12 years because I stopped my anabolic steroid bonanza about that long ago. And that was still very much discussed even 12 years ago. A friend of mine, Nelson Virgil, was not necessarily a proponent, but he was someone that goes, hey, for me, it just makes me feel good. Obviously, I was again conscientious because he was a HIV patient, that maybe there was something going on there with him. But it's just, I don't know, I guess I'm relieved that I'm one of these less is more. If I don't need a drug, I'm not going to take it. Or if I'm not absolutely sure the benefits are overwhelming in favor of, I'm just not going to take it. I'm not going to roll that dice. The next question I'm going to ask is about my concern with TRT in general, as opposed to seeing if we can recover testosterone naturally. Now, before I do that, bro, you mentioned that we don't know that much about HRT in general. Certainly not as much as some of the gurus claim to know as facts. I know you're very much, at the end of the Dunning-Kruger effect. You've just got more questions now. You know what you know, but you're also open to the possibility here that we could be making some mistakes. And so recently I've pondered with the thought, because I'm one of these skeptics, it's very hard for me to trust people. And it's this weird ego thing where now I'm finding it hard to trust people with anything. All right. And it served me in the way that I know a lot of these people speak confidently on things. The whole world believes them. And then 10 years later, we find out this thing was completely wrong, furthering my paranoia, right? So now I'm starting to think, hey, is there a possibility here that TRT itself is not wrong, but there are some risks that we're not considering? And the reason I thought this is because, with IGF-1, how when we're younger, it's higher. But then at the end of our life, even in the healthy people, it tends to get lower. And that could possibly be beneficial, meaning it doesn't proliferate the growth of other cells. But then I'm thinking, wait, does it just stop at IGF-1? Is there maybe a benefit to having lower testosterone as we age? Is that possible, bro?
Yeah, I've looked a lot at this, both in terms of, I guess, just thinking about it, but also in practice. And I kind of have a bit of a disagreement with some approaches in the space, particularly around like DHEA, for example, that we want to take, DHEA to youthful levels for an older man. Why? Why do we want to do that? I would argue that we don't want it to be deficient, absolutely. But should a 90-year-old man have the same hormone levels as a healthy 21-year-old man? No, that doesn't make any biological sense. The caveat to that, though, the middle ground that I fall into is that the average 20-year-old has the healthy levels of a 90-year-old man. So if you take a 90-year-old man and go, hey, we're going to give you the testosterone level of a healthy 21-year-old these days, it's probably about right for the 90-year-old, because the average 21-year-old is massively deficient in these hormones. But what you find in practice when you do this, and this is why it's so important that there are people out there who actually specialize in working with younger men, not just older men, is that if you take a guy who's 21 years old and he's healthy and he's doing everything right, that guy is going to need a much higher free testosterone to feel his best than an 80-year-old on TRT. It makes sense. Conversely, if you give that 80-year-old the level that you gave the 21-year-old to resolve his symptoms, he's going to be jacked through the roof. He's not going to tolerate it. So I think that there does need to be a gradient that's adjusted to age in terms of where we optimize testosterone to. Because one word that gets thrown a lot about around the space a lot, and it gets parroted in a way that loses all meaning, is supraphysiological. What is supraphysiological for you, and what is supraphysiological for me? What is supraphysiological for a 70-year-old obese alcoholic who's type 2 diabetic? And what's physiological or supraphysiological for a 21-year-old giga-chad who's in perfect health and he's biohacked every aspect of his life? They're all going to be very different numbers. It's not just one number that we draw in the sand and go, anything above that is not physiological. So I think that, when it comes to TRT, one thing that I strongly believe in is that being hypergonadal is not only a horrible experience subjectively, but biologically, it massively increases your disposition to developing the diseases of aging. That's why we see in menopause, the risk of heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and dementia go through the roof when the hormones plummet. And we see the same thing in men. When guys have high stress and they've got poor health and they've got poor hormone levels, we see that the risk of these diseases and the outcomes of these diseases get worse. And we can mechanistically look and go, yep, this is part of the puzzle. The part that falls short, though, is that we upgrade the hormone levels, but we completely neglect all the other aspects of health that goes with it. And this is the part that I think can be risky, and this is the stuff that I think can cause problems. If you give an 80-year-old who's unhealthy the levels of a healthy 21-year-old, that's not cardioprotective. That's going to put stress on his heart. If you take an 80-year-old who's, had buildup of plaque in his arteries, he's insulin resistant, he's got high blood pressure, he's an alcoholic, doesn't exercise, and you go, let's optimize your free testosterone level to double the top of the reference range, that's not going to be healthy. That has no business being that. But does that mean that level is inherently bad? It's like saying a Lamborghini engine is bad if you put it in the wrong car. It's not a bad engine, it's just the wrong setting for it. So I think that optimizing testosterone levels is even if there are drawbacks, TRT is not perfect. And that's why when guys want to go on TRT when they don't need it, I'm like, look, this is a medical intervention for people who are sick. This is a imperfect way of fixing a pathway that's broken. This is not like a cheat code just to get testosterone levels of a footy player or some athlete that you haven't earned yourself. So I think optimizing testosterone levels are important, but I also think it's about what level do we optimize it to. And I think more is not better, but I also think we have to have a look at the individual. And I think age and baseline state of health is really important for determining, well, how much testosterone should you actually take? And that's why it's so individualized. And that's why it's so important that guys get proper help with this. They don't just go on YouTube and do it themselves.
I like that you said TRT is an imperfect way of doing this, suggesting that, guys, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, if you can recover or restore your testosterone naturally, please do so, because we have an expert here saying this is an imperfect way of doing things. That's something I'm wrestling with, because I'll be honest with you, when I started this fertility protocol that you recommended to me, I started with just HCG and FSH. I came off testosterone. Realistically, I felt fine. And I've done it before, and I'm quite confident I could recover levels. I'm just lazy or fearful that there might be a period where my levels are low or suboptimal. And I guess the concern is that, like you said, it's imperfect. How do I know, even if I'm living the perfect life? No one does, but let's presume for this experiment I do. Is there a benefit to having a lower level? I mean, we just won't ever really know, will we? And so I guess I've looked into what research we have available, and the dose I'm taking, it's not really reflected in these papers. The doses reflected in these papers, I would consider them too low. Now, a lot of these testosterone levels are much lower than where my testosterone level is now. And for context, my free testosterone in P-moles, it's 800 plus, depending on where I'm drawing the labs. Whereas in the papers, we convert that to United States units, it's lower. And I'm thinking a lot of these papers might not be relevant for me with the dose I'm taking. I'm taking 150 milligrams per week. A lot of these doses are more in the 100 milligrams per week, sometimes even less. And also, truthfully, I have to be honest, I've taken 100 milligrams per week and I feel fine. It's just I'm less muscular. You know, so I'm taking 150 milligrams. I don't necessarily feel worse at 150, but I'm more muscular than I would at 100. I just am, and so I might be lightly juicing my way to an earlier death. I don't know, bro. Is that possible?
I don't think at those levels, because I see, like, one thing that I see all the time is like, and I'm very blessed that guys come to me in this situation. I get guys come to me who don't need TRT. They're like, hey, my testosterone levels are awesome and I want to maintain this and stay on top of this. So I don't get a lot of these guys, but I've had enough of them over the years to see where these natural testosterone levels sit. And I've seen that level naturally a heap. I've seen much higher levels than that naturally a heap. And those guys are doing really, really well. I also think that, and I've spoken to a bunch of my colleagues about this who all agree, is that if you were hypothetically going to make a free testosterone of 800 or take TRT to get a free testosterone of 800, I don't think the TRT one works as well as the natural one. And I think that there's a bunch of factors for that. It's not being manufactured locally in the cell. I think that's probably the biggest factor as well. There's different aspects of receptor binding. It's going through the liver to be cleaved and it's getting distributed in a different way. But what we see is that we often have to take the levels on paper a little bit higher when we use exogenous testosterone to get the same symptom resolution as guys have naturally. And we also see that when we look at observational studies, but there's a really important caveat to this, which is what a whole bunch of my practice is based on. When we look at observational studies, guys with those levels that you're talking about who have those levels naturally have better health outcomes than guys who have lower testosterone levels. So I think that number that you're looking at, that free testosterone of 800 to 1200, which is basically top quartile of the reference range to just over a quartile above the reference range. For me, when I look at levels like that, I think that is objectively healthier. I think there's levels that go beyond that people could argue, depending on receptor resistance and individual variability. Is it healthier to go above that to a point? Maybe. I think that there's some contention there. But the most important thing, and this is where guys get this stuff completely wrong, because they hear that and they go, cool, done. There's a big caveat there. If we are looking at observational data on guys who aren't on TRT, they had to earn those testosterone levels themselves. They had to acquire those naturally. That is not an easy level to have naturally. Even if you have good genetics, you have to be doing everything right to actually earn those testosterone levels. So this is something that we call in science a healthy user bias. So if you're on TRT and you go, oh, well, in this observational study of a whole bunch of natural guys, they had a free testosterone level the same as where I'm taking mine to, therefore it's healthy because it's observed in those guys. You didn't have to do all the other stuff that's health promoting to get that level. So if you don't do that, then it actually may not be healthy for you. And this is one of the most important things I try to teach my guys in terms of reducing the acute side effects from TRT, but also just feeling better and having that sweet spot balance between performance and longevity. You have to take a step back and go, okay, if I'm going to take my testosterone levels up to X, it means that if I could, I would be making these levels naturally. And the disconnect between that is, in my experience, what causes the vast majority of side effects. Unhealthy men are giving themselves healthy testosterone levels and are expecting that testosterone level alone to make them healthy. It's like taking a Suzuki Swift that needs a service, putting a Lamborghini engine in it and going, this is going to make my car a Lamborghini. No, it's not. And the other thing as well is you just think because you buy a Lamborghini that now you're going to know how to drive it. That thing goes faster, but it's difficult to control around the corners. Same with higher testosterone as well. If you're going to put your body into an optimal testosterone environment, you need to actually make sure that the receptor expression internally is going to match that signal that you're putting in. So if you're living like someone who would be completely if your body would be completely suppressing your testosterone production and it's pumping the brakes, and you're coming in and going, I can solve this, more accelerator, you're not going to have a smooth ride forward. You're now working against your body. You're not working with the body. And I think that the overall habits in terms of how someone lives is really important in determining whether the testosterone they're taking is actually going to be health promoting or potentially health damaging for them.
Makes sense. I guess my next question on that would be, for these couch potatoes that we throw in optimal testosterone, what sort of symptoms do they see that they aren't able to tolerate? Has it got to do with hematocrit, or is it something psychological? What tends to happen to these guys that you see?
Well, we know that increased systemic inflammation increases aromatase production. So one thing that I see is that they get the symptoms associated with excess estrogen. Even doing 2 to 3 injections a week of a conservative dose, they get the negative estrogen symptoms. And a lot of the time they don't even correlate with the serum estradiol level. And it's because they're putting a bunch of testosterone into a body that would never be able to make it, because aromatase production is upregulated because estrogen's anti-inflammatory. So the body is trying to put fire out, and you're putting in a whole bunch of gasoline. And the smoke alarm's going off, and you're going, oh, I'm going to turn the smoke alarm off by taking an aromatase inhibitor. You fix one problem, then you get sore joints and you get mood issues and all these kind of stuff. So I see estrogenic symptoms as one of the, and it's not the only thing that causes these symptoms, but it's definitely a big factor. The other one is acne as well. Guys will get terrible acne, and a lot of the time guys get acne because they sweat into polyester clothes, or they're using, dirty underground steroids, which are, impure, and they're injecting themselves with crap. But, even when we get the protocol perfectly dialed in, we see acne, we see estrogenic side effects, increased water retention, increased blood pressure, and increased blood viscosity. And that there's the problem with all this stuff is there's nuance. And people like to, and this is, going back to what we were talking about in terms of a formalized training in science, is that people actually need to learn to interpret scientific literature. And there's this consensus at the moment in people who like to talk about science who aren't scientists. And I don't mean to sound elitist in that, but I'm not a mechanic, so I'm not going to pop the bonnet in my car and fuck around with what's under the hood and think I'm an expert on it. I can still watch car videos. I can still drive a car, though. I can still appreciate it, but I wouldn't tell other people what to do. And when it comes to science, there are always outliers. There are always exceptions to the rules, but they don't disprove rules. So it's important that guys understand that, just because they don't fall into that category, that they're 1 in 100, doesn't mean the rules are wrong. It just means that there can be outliers in determining, rules for the masses. So when it comes to increased blood viscosity on testosterone, it's important to note that part of the therapeutic benefit of TRT, and my friend Dr. Keith Nichols has covered this prolifically, he explains this much more eloquently than me. When we go on TRT, the increased red blood cell production is therapeutic. That's part of getting more oxygen to the cells in the body. It takes ferritin down. The body is actually operating at a higher capacity and producing red blood cells. That's not a bad thing. But if the foundation for that is already polycythemia, which is like a disease state from poor metabolic function, sleep apnea, chronic stress, there's all these factors that cause this, that therapeutic increase in red blood cell count, if that's already on top of a high hematocrit to begin with because of a disease state, this is an example of a disconnect between the testosterone levels going in and the testosterone levels that should be there. And sometimes this will take someone's hematocrit into a level that, can be in the high 50s that will induce, a risk of a whole bunch of problems that typically shows up as either a red face or extremely high blood pressure. And then they say, oh, well, the solution for this is to go and donate blood. It's a Band-Aid. The solution for that is being like, well, what's causing the underlying pathological increase in these red blood cell counts? And a lot of the time when you sit down with these guys and they've got this red blood cell problem, or they've got this estrogenic problem, or they've got this problem with acne, or this problem with insomnia, or this problem with excessive sweating, we can just take a step back. And I often ask them the question, what are you doing that you know you shouldn't be doing? Or what are you not doing that you know you should be doing? And I say, now that you're on TRT, you're not getting away with that. And almost always it's excessive alcohol consumption. And a lot of the time guys are like, oh, I don't drink that much. I just have 10 or 15 drinks on a Friday. No, you can't do that. Lack of exercise, eating too much junk food, being more than 20 to 25% body fat. Guys don't realize how lean they need to be to actually be healthy. If you're greater than 20% body fat, you wouldn't have TRT levels to begin with. Of course, you're going to get side effects. So sometimes it can be a difficult pill to swallow. I say it's a big fat suppository going up there because it's uncomfortable, is realizing just how much of a good state of health you need to be in to tolerate and get the benefits of optimal testosterone production. And a lot of the time guys are like, oh, I don't want to do that, but they want to feel good. They want to feel like they want to have the clear energy, no brain fog, good sleep, good sexual function. They want all of those things. but they don't want to actually be the guy who would have those things and earn them. And that's one of the biggest issues that I see on TRT is guys are just not taking care of themselves as well as they need to.
Yeah, we're starting to discover objectively here that testosterone is not the panacea it is marketed out to be. I'm either lucky or unlucky to not be able to see a lot of these people in my circle. I mean, I'm the fattest guy in my circle, and I see my abs most of the time. It's athletes, and these people are ticking all the boxes, not because they're motivated. They just seem to enjoy it. Like, so for me, I wouldn't consider myself the epitome of health, but I can't imagine not going to the gym. It's just, I don't even think of it as something to be motivated to do. It's the same with getting sun and eating nutritious food. It just seems to be something that I fall into place with. Again, don't do everything perfect, but within my circle at least, we're probably seeing the top 1% of men, you know? And so within that clique, I'm trying to discover what issues I see, even with them doing the right things. And I guess my next question here is, it's a little bit out there. I'm not sure if it's been asked, but I figured you're the person to ask with this question. This next question is a bit out there. I'm sure it hasn't been asked before, but definitely you're the person to ask for it. It's a female question predominantly, but also I think could apply to men too. Both my mother and my stepmother are currently going through menopause. No matter what I tell them with regards to looking into HRT, despite the debilitating side effects that both of them are experiencing, they're not going to trust the son with the face tattoos. All right? Fair enough, I say. But then there is my favorite author. Well, you are one of my favorite authors. I won't just say that. But one of my favorite authors, Dr. Robert Sapolsky, he writes about this and says that if women wait too long to initiate HRT after already crushing levels of estrogen, something can change with the receptors. And then when they do initiate HRT, they see an array of negative effects that they are unable to heal, if you will. So it's like the HRT doesn't work the same if they wait too long before initiating. And then it got me thinking, post-finasteride syndrome, people that stop DHT blockers, but then long after they're having these problems, like, is there some permanent damage going on here? And here's an anecdote from myself and one other. It's an N of 2, but this is all I got. I obviously abused aromatase inhibitors, fearful of estrogen, but then I stopped them. It took me 16 weeks on TRT to get them back to normal. And ever since then, even if I bring the testosterone up high, I cannot get my estrogen up, both symptomatically, okay, so itchy nipples, and also on the blood work. Is it possible that we can permanently or semi-permanently damage estrogen receptors?
I think it's possible. And I think one of the most interesting fields of science that's emerging is epigenetics. And for those who don't know what epigenetics is, so if you have two parents with blue eyes, you're going to have blue eyes. That's set in stone. That's genetics. Epigenetics is, if we had two timelines, like, Marvel movies, where your parents were like super healthy, or they were like, drug addicts and very unhealthy, and they had you as a kid, those factors are going to impact your epigenetics. And what you eat, how you act, your stress levels, everything over time, like your epigenetics are quite plastic. So we can kind of think of these more as things that flick on and off switches rather than things that are set in stone. And that's why when people say, oh, this is genetic, it's like, well, some things are genetic, but some things are things that you had a genetic predisposition towards developing, and then that's what's caused it to develop. So when we're looking at things like whether it's abuse of aromatase inhibitors or abuse of any drug, when we look at, as well as, if you had a woman who was, postmenopausal with deficient hormones across the board, not just estrogen, but progesterone, testosterone, potentially thyroid as well. If that is left unchecked for a prolonged period of time, and then you recover those hormone levels, what kind of damage has been done to the epigenetic signaling? And this is something that we don't really know much about, but I think that there is some pretty viable mechanistic theory to say, and this is what I say to guys all the time. I go, look, if you've got borderline low testosterone levels and you're starting to get symptoms, don't wait until it gets terrible. One, because you can avoid the suffering, but two, we don't know what that period of it being terrible is before you recover it. is going to do to long-term things like development of cancer, insulin resistance, building up of plaque in the arteries, issues with brain damage leading to early onset dementia. I mean, can then optimizing the hormones undo that? Maybe, maybe not. We don't really know. But I always come back to this idea that, we get one shot at this. We've got one body. We can't go back in time yet. So I think it's good to make pragmatic decisions. But I also think that it's difficult to not operate from a place of fear. And that's why I'm such a big advocate for patient education, because it's like we need to be able to give people a whole bunch of information that's not trying to sell them shit, that's trying to go, hey, this is, what we understand. This is a paradigm. This is a way of looking at things. What do you want to do with your health? And I've met some women who, I don't really work with women much, but when, female friends of mine sit down with me and show me their bloods, I'll just give them my 2 cents and, refer them off to a friend of mine who's a specialist with them. But, sometimes women say to me, they go, I understand that HRT is an option, but I want to age the way that my body's supposed to age or the way that God intended. Cool. Like, if that's what you want to do, then that's your choice. But also, I think that there's this other way of looking at it, which is like, menopause is objectively terrible for health. It's the plummeting of all your protective hormones very, very, very quickly. And that's very, very harsh on the body. So, if women want to be pragmatic about that and, optimize their hormones during the perimenopause period, I think that makes a lot of sense. I just don't know how to do it. I do have a friend of mine who I refer women to for that discussion, though. But I think those epigenetic changes are things that we're learning more about. I've heard plenty of guys like you who went through a period where they belted AIs and then they've never been able to get their estrogen. They consistently have low estrogen symptoms long term. Same with PSSD, post SSRI syndrome, is whatever the D stands for, disorder. Is guys will go on SSRIs for a prolonged period, they'll withdraw off them, and then it seems like the autoreceptor signaling in the brain changes, and it changes the way that the brain permanently metabolizes and produces serotonin. So arguably, depending on how you look at it, the drug works really well. You stop taking the drug and it's still having that effect. It's just that you don't want that. And I think that's one of the reasons why, like, everyone's got a different lens in this space. And I try not to be dogmatic, but, I often use the joke, like, just to be quite crass, like, if you want to stick your dick in a blender, I'm pretty fucking dogmatic about you not doing that. And I'm dogmatic about things that I think are very dangerous for people. So I don't like the use of pharmaceutical drugs if someone doesn't need them. I don't like this prophylactic use of pharmaceuticals because I worry that because we don't know everything about how these pharmaceuticals impact all the other aspects of your health. We know what they do, but a lot of the time it hasn't been studied what else they're doing. Sometimes these drugs are quite dirty. I mean, anastrozole blocks the progesterone receptor. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of these drugs have other secondary mechanisms of action. And what we don't know is, because it hasn't been studied, we don't know what happens long term. And because it hasn't been studied, it doesn't mean it hasn't happened. I use the analogy all the time. There's no study to say that if I come over to Austria now, punch you as hard as I possibly can in the face, that's going to hurt. No one studied that. We have mechanistic theory to understand why that would be. It's common sense. But sometimes people will just go, oh, well, this hasn't been studied, so it doesn't happen. And I think that we should be operating from a guilty until proven innocent paradigm when it comes to pharmaceuticals, which is why I really strongly discourage people from using pharmaceuticals if they're not sick. So if you're in a situation being like, oh, I want to improve this or improve that, find lifestyle interventions or safe, well-tolerated natural supplements to do that, rather than trying to push your biology into a direction that you think it needs to go, because the body might disagree and you might deal with consequences down the line that in hindsight is going to be 2020, but at the time you didn't know better. And I think that these are all the things that we're learning about how these drugs or how these states or how these prolonged uses of things impact epigenetics. And I think it's really, the converse is it's really exciting for younger guys to learn this, coming into their early 20s, to be like, okay, I'm going to be more careful. I'm going to be more conservative. I'm going to take more precaution with this kind of stuff. I'm not going to experiment with all these random peptides and research chemicals that everyone's hyping up on the internet. And I'm going to look after the one body that I get as well as possible, because you're in it till death. And I think that's the silver lining of all this stuff.
Very hard to disagree with that, bro. Now, I don't want to be a fear mongerer, but damn, if someone 10 years ago told me that there is this tablet known as an anastrozole or Arimidex. And if you take too much of it, that's going to make you feel way worse than any bender on MDMA and cocaine you ever had. And I would have said, no way, that's not possible. And it's concerning to me because the anecdote is overwhelming. I'm talking about friends I trust, people I trust within a circle that years later tell me, they go, bro, I'll be honest with you. Since I took that DHT blocker, my dick don't work the same. It's there, it's kind of back, but it's not the same. And then I've got to look over them and be like, I wouldn't even want to say this publicly, but I don't think I've been as happy since that experience with anastrozole. I felt like I was a sort of person that wasn't even prone to anxiety or any depressive states. Yet since recovering from that, I would say that I have less sadness, but less happiness too. It's a bit more monotonous, almost as if the saying goes, I'm fried a little bit. Yeah. And that sounds a little bit out there, I know, but if we take a look at a bone, when we break it and we'll shatter it, we can put it together, but the crack's still there. And I feel like there are thousands of men suffering from this post-finasteride syndrome, or as I call it, post-anastrozole syndrome. Are you seeing that a lot where, again, don't want to be a fear-mongerer, but are you seeing people that are better, but not back to their old self?
Completely. And again, I don't want to fearmonger, but one thing that I talk to my colleagues about a lot is that one thing that scares me is it's rare to find someone under 35, so if we're talking about men and women, who haven't been on hormonal birth control, SSRIs, or hair loss drugs. It's quite rare to find someone who hasn't used one of those drugs for a period, if not multiple. Women using birth control, like hormonal birth control, and or SSRIs, and then men using SSRIs and or hair loss drugs. That's scary because how is that going to impact the epigenetics for the rest of their life? How is that going to impact the epigenetics of their kids? I think that that's scary. So yeah, I see this stuff all the time. I mean, I used minoxidil from like 18 to 23, and I had no idea at the time, but that definitely had an impact on my sex drive and function. Absolutely. I'd say that most of it has recovered now, but I don't have an alternate timeline to see, if it would have, how it would have been different. But I think that there is a factor there for sure, and that's, I guess I've become quite stoic with it because I've made room in myself to not be okay because I'm always a little bit off balance, and that's kind of the battle scar that's got me through life. But I counsel guys about this all the time, and this is one of the reasons why I get quite frustrated at the medical industry, because GPs will just give these medications out like Skittles. It's one of the reasons I dropped out of psychiatry is I was raising concerns being like, we don't have long-term follow-up data to support that this is safe, so why are we assuming that it is? And that's one of the reasons I dropped out, because a lot of these drugs have been around for long enough to do these follow-up studies on. They just choose not to do them because it wouldn't be conducive to their profit margins. It's a very corrupt industry, and it's very scary how these drugs are getting peddled on people. And it's even making its way over here into the Baltics, which is a huge shame. People are less scathed by this stuff over here, but it's still becoming a problematic part of the younger generation. So I really try to help guys understand that unless you have a time machine, that you can't go back and change these things, and you have to play the ball where it's landed. And sometimes a difficult part of aging is becoming accustomed to the fact that you will wear and tear, because that's part of going through life. And you might get an injury that never fully recovers, and you might take a medication for a while that you never fully recover from, or you might go through some traumatic shit that you're never going to be the same from again. And you're probably going to go through something like that again in the future a bunch of times. And that's the silver lining I try to give guys is go, look, yeah, this stuff might have permanently altered you, but you've just got to make room for that. And because that's just what happened, and that's the way it is. And I like to hope that if we consistently go, okay, I can't undo or fix that, but maybe I can compensate for that by doubling down on trying to improve my epigenetic expression in the right direction. Maybe I can net a positive overall. Maybe I can recover holistically in a way that even though I might not be 100% with this or 100% with that I'm still going to be okay. And maybe I'll be even better than okay. But what will make me 100 times worse is stressing and fixating on something that I can't fix rather than looking and being like, well, what positive stuff can I do about it? And it might sound like a cop-out answer for some people, but that's the only answer that we've got. That's the reality of the situation. And, maybe in the future when there's more research on bioregulated peptides, maybe there can be ways that these things can be reset in like a factory reset style setting in the future. Who knows? But that stuff comes up all the time, particularly with SSRIs and discontinuing from SSRIs, as well as therapeutic use of things like dexamphetamine, Ritalin. These kind of things can also make people feel different after they've used them for a period. But that's just one of the challenges of the modern world.
That's a great message, I think, bro. And one that I've adopted more recently in the last, let's say, 5 years, because when you come from a place from feeling so good and having such a, I don't know, I want to say gifted life where everything just seems to be going so well, and there was something as silly as a aromatase inhibitor to completely destroy that and never quite get that back, you can fixate on the past, on the memories of the past, like kind of like a blind person that could once see and then now they can't see anymore. To continue to fixate on that would just make matters worse. And so I agree. That's definitely where I'm going with this. But that kind of leads me to thinking that, has anyone stopped a drug at the point at which it didn't feel good? So for example, the only reason I stopped taking a heap of MDMA is because I just wasn't feeling good anymore, right? I'd have taken MDMA every weekend until I died if I felt the same. Same with alcohol, same with all these recreational drugs. So it almost feels inevitable that if you are someone that enjoys the high or drug experimentation, a lot of us end up in this hole because we kind of are destined to overdo it because it feels so good. I mean, that's the same with my friends who are bodybuilders. They keep taking more. And why wouldn't they? Well, I take more steroids. I get more muscle. I get leaner. And the only reason they stop is because they're forced to stop. Who just stops taking steroids? Who just stops? You stop because you had to stop. Do you ever find someone that just goes, no, you know what? I've had enough. It was amazing. I want to finish at the top and just stop. I haven't met them.
They're a rare breed. The guys who I'm really proud of, and I've got a few guys who are like this, are guys in their mid-20s, and they worked out in their mid-20s because they solicited guidance from someone like myself who made the mistakes and learned from them, is going, hey, if you can not experiment with a bunch of drugs and you can find a way to get that high from having a purpose and exercising and eating clean and looking after yourself and feeling the best you possibly can naturally, because you understand, like maybe they're a bit more cautious, maybe they've got a little bit of anxiety that kind of keeps them at bay. Those guys are doing so unbelievably well. And I'm so proud of those guys because I'm like, you listened, you sought the advice that most people ignore, and you're now living proof. And they often look around at their peers being like, this was definitely the right call. I've seen some guys in those more conservative categories who'll do a couple of cycles, like really conservative cycles, like, adding 200 milligrams a week of Primo to their TRT for 10 weeks, and pushing up the protein and pushing up the training and, doing blood work before, during, after. And, they do it a couple of times. They, gain some extra tissue and they just leave it. I have seen those guys, and those guys tend to be guys who are very grounded, very disciplined, very on the straight and narrow from the beginning. And a lot of the time, the things that those guys have in common is that they came from families with older brothers or parents that were alcoholics or drug addicts, and they saw how it worked out that way. So I have seen them, but I do see a lot of the time in the space, a lot of these guys are using anabolic steroids like recreational drugs because they're dopaminergic, they're long-acting, they make you feel powerful, then they have long-term effects after you use them in terms of you're bigger, stronger, more powerful. Sometimes they can even help your mindset, help your motivation, energy. I see a lot of these guys, they get into the 500 milligrams to a gram of combined injectable androgens per week, and then they go back to TRT and they go, no, I need to keep feeling like how I felt before. And then some of them, just throw caution to the wind. They don't get blood work and they're just like, come what may. And other guys are a bit more proactive with it. But yeah, they will get to the point where we'll sit down and go, look, like you shouldn't have done this in the first place. I told you not to, and now your blood work looks like this, and this is your first wake up call. Your next one's going to be scarier. The one after that's going to be even scarier. So it's up to you if you listen now or not. Some of them do, some of them don't. Depends how much they have to lose.
Yeah. I mean, that's my entire circle. If you look at my Instagram following, you don't need to see much to see the sorts of people on there. And I actually take my hat off to a lot of these people because they do what it takes to win. But there's definitely the portion of them that regret it. I mean, I've met those people too. And I just get to the point now where I am one of these paranoid people on drugs in general. But at the same time, I feel like I'm missing out. I mentioned it to you before. I don't know if we have time, but there's that one area of drugs that just it's plagued me so much, bro, that every day I'm spending at least 10 to 30 minutes on psychedelics. Just people's experiences, which ones, how they work. I'm obsessed with psychedelics, bro. And guess how many I've tried if you don't include marijuana, which I don't believe is 0. I have not tried any psychedelics, bro, but I'm super fascinated with psychedelics, and I just can't get away from it. You know, I just really want to scratch that itch. So if you have time for someone who has gone through, let's say, all of my trauma is drug experiences, like drug experience has gone wrong. What advice do you have for someone who just loves drugs and just keeps researching psychedelics and wants to try them one day?
Sure. So medicine drum up on the wall behind me. I can attribute a lot of who I am today in the aspects that I'm, you know, there's a tricky line between being proud of yourself and being a narcissistic prick. And if any, like, I am very much not a narcissistic person. It took me a long time to get to the point where I gave myself credit where credit's due. And I'm like, hey, I got through some shit, and I made something of myself to the point that, like, you know, if I pass away tomorrow, you know, I don't want to die, but I'll be peaceful because I lived a life that I'm proud of, and I made the world a better place because I'm in it. And a lot of that perspective, as well as the paths that I have been led down, have been as a result of my introspective work with psychedelics. Psychedelics can be, you know, psychedelics is a broad category of drugs, and, you know, arguably you could put MDMA in the category of psychedelics as well, depending on how you look at it. But it's, when we're talking about the value of a psychedelic experience, it's something that it's very difficult to describe. But if it's done in the right set and setting, with the right intention, with the right medicine and the right people, it's still high risk, high reward. And it's something that I never encourage people to look at. But if they're going down that path, it's something I'm always very happy to talk to people about, because it's had such a profound positive impact on my life. And I use this example a lot, is that if you walk outside and get hit by a bus, you're going to learn a couple of things. One, getting hit by a bus hurts. Two, you know, look both ways before you cross the street. You learn those things from the intrinsic experience of getting hit at a high velocity with a very large amount of mass. But when you woke up in hospital, you also learned a bunch of other things. You learned about the fragility of human life. You learned about your own mortality. Maybe you learned to spend less time working and more time enjoying life. Maybe you learned the importance of telling people that you love them. Maybe you learned the importance of thanking your parents for what they did for you. Maybe you learned a whole bunch of those things. Now, getting hit at high velocity didn't have anything to do with you learning that. It was the experience of what you went through. And psychedelics are very similar if they're done in the right way with the right medicines, because you create an experience that works via the DMT receptors, which are the receptors that activate right before the moment of death. And these experiences can be a very powerful introspective way of holding yourself accountable and putting things into perspective. I have a very balanced scientific and woo-woo depiction of psychedelics. My medicine of choice is ayahuasca. And I do not believe, I've spent hours looking at how ayahuasca works mechanistically and how to, you know, optimize the experience in a way that's still respectful to the traditional ways that it's practiced, because I think it does also get bastardized. I think there is some benefit to doing these things traditionally, just because that's the traditional way to do them. And there's some ancestral wisdom in that. And there's also respect there for the people who came before you. But when it comes to ayahuasca, I don't think that you're learning anything from some kind of external entity. You're learning everything that you already know. And it is very valuable sometimes to sit down with yourself and have a very powerful experience of holding yourself accountable, seeing where you are out of alignment with your potential and the person you could be, and seeing what is causing that blockage or seeing what's causing that derailment, and experiencing that in a way that is so powerfully undeniable that that you're basically forced to learn from that experience. We say with ayahuasca that it's something, and for those who don't know what ayahuasca is, it's a traditional brew which combines two plants, which basically allows you to have a elevated state of consciousness while experiencing a slow release DMT. And there's a bunch of other really important phytochemicals and molecules in there that add to that experience. And the advantage of having that and doing that is essentially you can have that recalibration experience of having the realizations and the things you learn from right before death, but you can have that experience without almost dying and then go back to living your life. And those experiences have been the things that have completely changed the way that I interact with other people. And the thing that I think is fantastic about these psychedelics is people tend to learn the same messages. They tend to learn the importance of their role in the greater collective consciousness, so they become less hedonistic and more connected to the people around them. And you tend to see, we have this saying that these medicines will reveal whatever's in the way of your heart, which is cheesy and esoteric, but it's very true when you see that, because you see what is stifling you from being present and free in terms of being able to fully love and fully show up with compassion and empathy and care, and also be of service to others. And not the downside, but the realistic part of this experience is that you learn this in a way that is the most intense, mind-bending, sometimes physically uncomfortable experience that you could possibly have. But it's something that if people are drawn to learning from that, humans have been altering our consciousness since as far back as we can realize. I mean, there's the theory of when the human brain rapidly grew during evolution. It was when we found psychedelic mushrooms. Psychedelics have been a part of religion as far back as the Aztecs. These are a big part of our culture and our evolution. And they are absolutely not for everyone. A lot of people who are seeking out psychedelics don't have the foundational stability needed to be able to go on that kind of journey. And that's when it can cause more harm than good. And that's why it's so important that guys don't just go and do this. They sit down with someone and go, should I do this? And have that person say no, or yeah, this actually could be a good thing for you. And then do it in a way that is as safe and vetted and comfortable as possible to achieve the therapeutic outcome. And it's when you have an experience like that, it's so, when we're working with DMT, the amazing thing about DMT is that it's so unbelievably mind-numbingly strong, but it's also familiar and it makes sense. And I think the combination of having something so mind-blowing yet so familiar and it all makes sense when you're doing it. It doesn't feel like a crazy, trippy, mind-boggling thing sometimes like LSD can. I think sometimes there's meaning there, and sometimes we don't really realize what that meaning is till afterwards. And sometimes the meaning itself is just having a really powerful mystical experience in this short time that we have on this earth.
Yeah. Now, a lot to unpack there.
Don't do drugs.
So I would say, at the very least, the last sentence you said, I don't want to leave this world not having had that mystical experience. At the very least. If I have any other bonuses that lead me in, better directions in my life, great. But for me, I guess I'm one of those people that is not looking for healing per se. But I guess, I've heard some friends that are very, we'll say, hard nuts, and they come out of it and they go, man, I learn about things I never thought I would. So how can I predict the experience when I haven't done it, right? So I'm very, very aware of that, yeah?
Excellent.
You won't recommend it or encourage it. I respect that. This is not medical advice. But bro to bro, from what you do know about me, do you think I'm a viable candidate for ayahuasca?
I think that most people who want to do it are not, because they're not stable enough, and they are seeking a they're seeking a solution to problems that they already know how to solve. They just don't want to solve it. And the problem is that when you drink ayahuasca with that, it kicks your ass, because it will just go, okay, here's that message so loud and so clear that you can't possibly not learn that. And that experience can often be, it's traumatic. You learn from it, but it's very uncomfortable and difficult. I'll share an example of my second my second experience with ayahuasca, and maybe this will make you want to do it, or maybe not. So the first experience I had was right when I finished rehab for my brain injury, and it was a very serendipitous process. It just popped up in my life. I've been researching it a lot. I had the offer to do it in a country that it was legal to do it in, let's say, and had this amazing, profound experience. It was like the closing of a rite of passage. It was very peaceful. It was very beautiful. It was the most mystical, amazing experience I've had in my life. And I went back the second time, and with the intention of wanting to be able to be more loving, because when I'd come out of this period of being, vertigo, only doing rehab, basically barely being able to keep my function together, people often think that when the acute stressor goes away, you're going to go back to how you were before. I stopped being dizzy, and then I was just extremely fucking traumatized. And that was a very difficult point to be in, because I'm like, okay, well, how do I fix this now? Like, what's next? So I went into this second ceremony with this intention of being like, I need to be able to open my heart to actually be able to love again, and to be able to, because I became very introverted, very, I was still empathetic and caring about other people, but I was just very shielded off and very, very traumatized, as anyone would be with what I went through. And ayahuasca is a lot like an onion. So like it will basically allow you to, if you think you're wanting to solve this, it will show you what's underneath that's actually causing this. And I had this really profound experience. So as I said, I had a very privileged upbringing. I love and adore both my parents. They were fantastic parents, but they were two working parents. They were both focused on their careers when I was younger. And they absolutely loved the hell out of me. They gave me the most amazing childhood, but they weren't as loving in the way that a child might be able to receive that love. So they weren't as huggy and saying they loved me and all that kind of stuff. They provided for me. My mom picked me up every day after school, even though she was a CEO. They gave me such an amazing childhood and loved me in a way that was their way of expressing love, but maybe was not a way that a child could understand that. And I basically relived a whole bunch of my childhood, realizing that I felt unloved and neglected by my parents, even though that wasn't actually objectively true at all. It was the opposite. And in going back and seeing myself as a child through the eyes of an adult who actually understands sacrifice, understands parenting, understands the world, I was able to go back and see that I was actually closing myself off, because I'd been closed off from a very young age emotionally, because I'd felt rejected and I'd felt hurt and I'd felt closed off. And I felt that that's when things were difficult. The solution was to go in, because no one cared about me. And then going back and seeing all that and realizing that it was ingrained in my psyche and it wasn't true, I was able to come out of that experience and realize, oh, it wasn't that I actually needed to open my heart and be more loving to other people. I just needed to actually recognize that I actually had all the love I needed already from my parents, and I was actually very loved from a child. And I kind of had to heal that inner child, which sounds very cheesy and wanky, but it led me to having some of the most amazing conversations with my parents. I was able to call my mom immediately after and, thank her for everything she did to me, and, tell her that, she was the best mother a child could have ever had. And that as an adult, I could see all the sacrifices she made, and I could see all the things that she did for me that I didn't recognize as a child, but now as an adult, I can really see it, and wanted to thank her for that, and tell her that, if she felt like she didn't do anything right when I was a kid, that she absolutely did the best job she ever could have. And I was super grateful and thankful for that. And then that opened up the dialogue of me telling her that I loved her, because that wasn't part of our usual vocabulary. And that kind of experience, I mean, she recounts that as one of the best phone calls of her life. But that was also such a pivotal experience in my emotional development, because it also led me to going, okay, now when I'm with my wife, or, at the time, if I was dating a girl, or if I'm going to have kids in the future, this is, this is something that's going to help you as well. Now I'm in a situation being like, how can I make sure that the people who I love know that I loved them because of knowing how important that is in a way that they will receive that. And learning those lessons and having that experience, like I didn't go into that ceremony thinking that's what I needed to learn. But once I kind of learned that and unblocked that in myself, it completely changed the way that I interacted with other people. But it also showed me the importance of saying that if I want to receive love from other people, I also need to be loving towards them, because it's not like a give and take. It's an open exchange that flows simultaneously. And that's stuff that when you go in and you come out of that experience at, at the time I was like 28, 29, it gave me a depth of emotional maturity because it helped me be so much more compassionate for other people in terms of understanding where they're coming from, understanding where their traumas are. And, learning things like that and taking those lessons and changing the way that I show up when I'm talking to my clients or talking to my parents or talking to my wife, it's profoundly impactful. It wasn't a fun experience. It was a very difficult, it's like a whole year of therapy all in one night. But the feeling that you get afterwards is like you've just cleared this big part of yourself that you didn't know needed clearing. And it's every time I've done it, it's changed me for the better. So if that inspires you or deters you from doing it, then so be it.
No, it inspires me to do it. I guess I don't have any traumas that I'm aware of. Also, super privileged upbringing. I mean, how I even got involved near gangs, let's say, is bizarre. Grew up in Applecross, bro. Applecross, Cardinia, like all the yuppie suburbs, My dad is, I wouldn't say wealthy, but he's above your blue-collar tradie, few mil net worth. Good schools, love, European family, just nothing really going wrong there. Yeah, they had a divorce, but who doesn't? But it was one of those loving divorces, right? Where both parents are amicable, all that stuff.
Yeah.
I guess for me, if I'm going to pick one trauma, I don't know if you've ever heard this, it's boredom. I don't know what else to do, bro. I mean, it's hard to talk about these things publicly because they're going to sound wanky. Every time you attach a monetary value to something, it sounds a bit wanky. But I guess a lot of a man's quest has to do with building businesses, reaching financial goals to get freedom. And I tell you, being free is boring because none of your friends are. Your friends are at work. So if I had all my friends who were financially free and we did stuff together like the show Entourage, amazing. I wouldn't even be considering this ayahuasca right now. But they're all still doing things, at least most of them, and I'm just alone. And as much as I love my chick and having the baby and that, I need my bro time, and I'm bored, bro. And so I figured ayahuasca might be the potential missing link to either A, do something new, or feel more content with doing nothing. And so does that sound like a kind of strange reason?
My biggest struggle with childhood was boredom. And I mean, I grew up in Mosman Park. I mean, like if we're going to have a pissing contest on privilege. But my biggest issue with childhood, I mean, I was an only child. I was always very, without sounding like a dickhead, I mean, I was always very smart. So it made me very lazy because everything was boring. And it wasn't until I discovered music and performing on stage, like that when you're performing on stage with 5 other guys and you've been practicing for years and the music's loud and you're all in sync, nothing replaces that feeling of exhilaration because it's the opposite of boredom because it's just everything all at once. And, when I look back on the process of rehabilitation when I was in it, at least I wasn't bored. It was horrible. It was traumatizing. It was brutal, but at least I wasn't bored. And I have very similar issues in terms of if I don't regulate my emotions and make correct decisions, my boredom will lead me to being driven towards vices because it's more fun. I mean, there was a period of my life where I'd get stoned before everything because it would make it harder. It would make it more challenging. I was, that was a very long period of my life where I realized that I wasn't trying to escape things. I was just trying to make the mundane more stimulating. And yeah, what I was, I mean, at the moment, I live out here in Lithuania. I live in a tiny little town on a lake in the national park. I have a Muay Thai coach I go and see once a week in the city. That's it. I completely keep to myself. I live I live the life of a 70-year-old hermit. And the reason why I do that is because I learned through this work and all my experiences in life that there is more happiness and fulfillment and peace in the process of the mundane and the stillness and connection to nature than there is in the hedonism. And that kind of scratched that itch for me, because I was always being like, okay, what's next? And then I kind of realized, I was like, hang on, everything that I was looking forward to, that I wanted next and next and next, everything was kind of lame. Like nothing was as exciting as I wanted it to be, unless it was enhanced by drugs. So I went the opposite direction, and I went, okay, how can I get really good at the mundane and basically find peace in solitude and find clarity and stillness in the boredom? How can I look at that and be like, this is my biggest challenge. How can I be content with this? Because I had to understand that nothing ever scratched that itch that was good for me. And I guess I found that I've got like my drum kit behind me. I've got a home gym in the basement. I've got a beautiful puppy here. I've got, a beautiful nature walks to go on every day. And every time I come back from like a city or like a trip or from Australia, I'm like, oh, fuck, this is boring. But then once I kind of settle into it, I'm like, this might be boring, but this is what I need. Might not be what I want, but this is what I need. So I basically gave myself the life that I felt like I needed, because I realized that constantly chasing that hedonism was leading me down a destructive and unsafe path. And I kind of had to like father myself and be like, I basically had to, and it's borrowing from Wes Watson. I know a lot of people don't like him, but I really like a lot of what he has to say, is that I basically had to become the man that I needed. And that man that I needed was someone who was grounded and steadfast and wasn't chasing the next shiny thing, because every time I'd caught the shiny thing, it was a disappointment anyway.
You are speaking to me today. I'm telling you, it's like you are stealing the thoughts out of my brain. Let's define this hedonism. It's a word that's described to someone who is in this constant quest of pleasure, a pleasure-seeking individual. And that's a lot of people, obviously. But for me, I was always convinced that the next thing was like, this is it, the Lamborghini Urus. The other Lamborghini sucked. This is the one. And then you get it, and literally you get 2 weeks. And that 2 weeks costs a lot of money. I was like, I just sacrificed that much risk for this 2 weeks dopamine. That was when I realized something's wrong here. And the reason it's wrong is because I can't trust myself anymore. Because prior to that purchase, I'm convinced. I'm like, nah, this is it. This is the one. As soon as I get to this status, I'm top G. And then you get there, and you mentioned Wes Watson. Him and people like him convinced me actually that I'm not like them. Now, I know he says a lot of other good things, but there are some periods where he really shows his arrogance and hedonism. He points to his watch or points to his car. And, oh man, I cringe at some of the times I posted my car. I'm not that guy. And I realized quickly I wasn't, hence deleting social media. I only reopened it for this podcast in the past few weeks. And that's when I realized that I am not like these guys on YouTube. And I also have a friend, and I wish I was like this at times. This friend of mine, really nice guy, he's like totally good with that. Like he gets the shiny new thing and it brings him this everlasting happiness. He's like, yeah, I love my cars. I love my mansion. I love my girls. I'm like, man, bro, like it sucks that I don't have that feeling you have, because since I was this big, I figured that's the guy I'm going to be. And I'm going to be happy once I get there. And he is, and I wasn't. So then I went through this decluttering process where I started liquidating heaps of things, not necessarily going hippie, bro, but just realizing that there's a big difference between a comfortable house and a watch that has a brand. I mean, one is not functional. The comfortable house is, right? So I started spending money on function. I still need a great deal of wealth. I get it to be there, but it's a lot less than I thought. So now I'm at this point where I definitely don't need any more money. What am I going to do? And it's this thing where you just said it. I feel like I have to father myself. I have to father myself. That's it, you know?
Do you have a dream?
I dream a lot. Yeah.
No, but like,
I
sorry,
don't
like,
remember them.
do you have like a dream of being like, like a real like big goal in terms of like, this is what I would love to, the person I'd like to be, what I'd like to have, where I'd like to be. Like, do you have like a dream like that?
Good question. I can tell you for about a decade, it was I was obsessed with supercars because my father is into cars. More classics, but I got obsessed with cars. And that kind of associated with a lifestyle, especially in Perth. You don't see a lot of 20-something-year-olds with Lamborghinis and that. You do, but you don't. I had that dream. That took a long time to do. But then as soon as I got that, I realized that wasn't the dream. Since then, I can only dream of being content as I was when I was 15. So the last time I was that truly happy, 15, smoking marijuana, content watching a David Attenborough documentary, fully in the moment, right? I haven't had that since, bro. I'm like always living in the future and the past, always.
Yeah, I hear. My I often say that the best point in my life was the school holidays between year 11 and 12, where I would just I wake up in the morning, I'd watch some fucking DVDs, and then I'd make like mee goreng noodles for lunch and drink a can of V or something, play some Xbox, play some Diablo 2 on my computer, and then just rinse and repeat, because it was just the ultimate stress-free, and I'd play some drums as well and talk to my buddies on MSN and shit. It was the ultimate just stress-free period of life. And, you know, one thing that I'm grateful for in terms of what I went through in my mid-20s was that when you get your life taken away from you, like I remember thinking, like, if I can walk properly again, like I wanted to be a cop. And the reason I wanted to be a cop, naively at the time, I was like, I want to be someone who's on my feet day to day in the world, you know, not wasting my life behind a computer, because, you know, walking and being able to be functional is such a privilege. I ended up not getting into the police because I found out it was right before COVID happened. It would have been awful. I would have had to quit anyway. But I had this newfound perspective and gratitude for things. And, you know, one of the most powerful things about psychedelics, if you have a good dose of it, is you feel like you've gone off the deep end, and you feel like that you fucked it and you're never going to come back. And it's so intense. And you go, if this would only end, I'm going to be so grateful that I have this and that when I come back to it. And then it does end and subside, and you go, oh. And when I was at this last ceremony, you know, one of the ladies asked me, she said, you know, what's your dream? And every other time I'd been asked that, I realized that I answered what I have now, which is that I wanted to live in nature with a wife who I could provide for, who didn't have to work, and a dog and a home gym and some drums, and not to be financially stressed. And that when she said that, and I was like, I'm good. Like I've actually got my dream. Now I feel like I'm just doing side quests. And that for me, like sometimes it's boring at 30, 31 to be like, oh, I'm just doing side quests now. Like I've kind of, you know, finished the main mission. But there's this huge amount of gratitude I have for that. Like when I started dating my girlfriend at the time, you know, she was working at like the equivalent of like, she was working, or you might have Bolt in Austria. It's like a European Uber. And she was making fuck all, working crazy hours. And I'm not really into cars or like anything. I mean, this is like a Bonds t-shirt. This is like a $70 G-Shock watch. I've never been kind of motivated by money because growing up, my parents had money. So I was always comfortable. I never felt a need to, they didn't give me money when I was an adult, but I never had that push to be like, oh, you got to get out of poverty and make money. And because I never really had any kind of attachments to anything physical that I really wanted, the only thing that ever motivated me to make money was being like, oh, if I work an extra hour a day, my girlfriend doesn't have to work, and this job makes her miserable, and that would be a really nice thing to do for someone. And so like for me, like I found that like to be able to scratch that itch of boredom is that and you know, it's probably stuff that you do for your partner as well. It's just like a perspective thing. Like every day I remind myself, and when I go to bed, like I'm not tortured by that voice in my head. Like I'm always very still and content to be like, I'm doing good for the people around me and the people who I love. And in the work that I'm doing the right thing by people. I'm not ripping them off. I'm helping people. I'm making the world a better place. And I guess I'd chased that grass is greener for hedonism so many times and realized that it wasn't greener, that I just learned that lesson enough times that now, you know, and every time I work with these psychedelics, it just becomes ingrained to me that I'm like, Yeah, I could always have more. I mean, there's always something more that I could aim for, but I'm also not going to let that detract from just how fucking grateful I am for what I've built and what I have. Because if we're not focusing on the gratitude, then we're just going to be miserable regardless of what we have. There's a really good book that you would like. It's called Hacking the American Mind. I can't remember the name of the author, but he talks about the neuropsychiatry of serotonin and dopamine. And dopamine is something that is subject to tolerance. So, cocaine, amphetamine, etc., you downregulate dopamine receptors. But dopamine is based on pleasure. And pleasure, the difference between happiness and pleasure is something that you have on your own. Whereas happiness and contentment is something that requires the involvement of other living things, whether it's, wife, friends, family, dog, whatever. But the difference between serotonin and dopamine is that serotonin isn't subject to tolerance. It doesn't downregulate with to the same degree that dopamine does. So, for example, if you go out for like a family function and everyone's there, gives you a big hug and there's connection and it's this kind of real sense of happiness and belonging. You don't get home and you go, oh fuck, I just want to have another family outing and see everyone again. You go, oh, I'm good. I'm going to get home and I'm going to chill and I feel happy and content. Whereas if you go out and go to the casino and do some cocaine and have some drinks and party on and do all that hedonistic dopaminergic stuff, you get home and what are you doing? You're getting on your phone. You're kind of trying to find the next pleasure thing because it hasn't given you that sense of that sedation, because dopamine is stimulating, whereas serotonin is sedating. So the thing that I found that's been really important, like one of the reasons I live in Lithuania is that all my wife's family is here. And although a whole bunch of them don't speak English, I know that family is really important to me because I didn't really have much of an extended family. And I went, okay, maybe instead of scratching or leaving myself open to needing all these pleasure hedonistic vices scratched, maybe I can subdue a lot of that by focusing on the things that are based on happiness, which is this connection, belonging, and the sense of being involved with others. And that's something that's very strongly helped me in terms of, I think, making room for that fact that I know that I'm drawn to that stuff, and that's just part of me, and that's how the brain works, and that's okay. Like, I don't dislike that part of myself, but also being like, well, how as a emotionally mature, self-aware adult am I going to regulate this in a way that is good for me and good for others, and is going to lead me at the end of the day to being proud of the decisions that I've made? And I think that's one of the things I always tell my guys is that you have to be proud of yourself when you go to bed at night, because you know how you show up when no one's watching. You know how you speak to the waiter when you're out getting your coffee. You know exactly how you treat people when no one else is around. You know how you keep your word to yourself, or if you don't. And those are the factors that lead at the end of the day to you either being tortured by that voice in your head when you're trying to sleep, or laying down and being at peace because you're like, hey, like, life's hard. This didn't come with an instruction manual. I don't have a clue what I'm fucking doing here, and I'm learning as I go. And I may not be perfect, but I'm proud of who I am, and I'm proud of the positive impact I'm having on the world around me. And I found that has scratched the boredom itch more than anything else.
This feels like a therapy session on its own. I mean, it does. I mean, you're definitely speaking to me. It's definitely making sense. And I'm a hard person to convince, because when it gets to feelings or that kind of, like you said, cheesy, it's hard for me to communicate with people. But at the same time, I'm not completely closed off to it. I think I'm socially and emotionally aware. It's just that I think when you don't have the degree of trauma some other people have had, like myself, it's hard for me to give it as much homage, right? And it's interesting you brought up the dichotomy between dopamine and serotonin. I haven't read that book, but I have read Robert Sapolsky's take, very similar. And it's one of the reasons why I'm making more time for friends. Interestingly, and I hope my family doesn't watch this, despite them being really good, I can't do family too much, bro. I've always been that way. I don't have much in common with them. I absolutely have that feeling, especially with my parents, but I can't, it's small doses. I love them, but small doses. But friends, I get that serotonin thing, right? But I'm just a greedy guy. This is how greedy I am, bro. I'll even know this science that you speak of. Read up about it. Have that experience with my friends. 2 days later, man, I'm back. I mean, I'm back to the dopamine chasing. It is just a constant battle of extremism. And in some ways, like you said, you don't dislike that about yourself, because I think being a dopamine chaser does drive you to take risks where others won't, right? Especially financially. I think it's an advantage. But you're right. I guess you're basically saying at some point, Daniel, you just have to learn, right? You just have to learn from your mistakes after you make them 100 times. Hopefully on the 101th time, you don't. And yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm not flying over to Miami and Colombia for benders at the same frequency I once did. But there's still many periods of the day, hours even, where I'm staring at the wall going, hey, I don't really have to do anything. I don't necessarily want to do that thing. I'll do it. But I'm in that purgatory stage. But this has been good. I guess the podcast thing, bro, if you're going to ask me one thing I like doing, I like having conversations with people that I like. I have to be honest. There is also the opposite feeling. I've got some podcasts that I haven't posted, and I didn't like the conversations with them, so I just didn't post it. I was very polite. I was like, I'm not going to post it. I didn't enjoy it. I don't know what else to say to them, man. But with you, it's good.
When I was a musician, like one of the interesting things is that like someone will give you a song and be like, play this, and my take is if you give me the song, you want me to play it in my style. But which I really enjoy, I'll play any style of music my way. But if you give me a song and say, play it this way, it is horrible. It is so boring. And it is just the worst experience ever. And I find conversations the same. Like I'm very introverted, like in terms of like how I live, and I always have been. And maybe that's a trauma response, or maybe that's how I like being introverted, because I see people who are dependent on others. And I'm like, that doesn't look advantageous to me. But comes with drawbacks, sure. But I love having conversation. I mean, I book 5, 6, 7 hours of phone calls some days because I just like talking to people. But I absolutely hate the small talk or talking about. But like, I like when the world was going through COVID and all this stuff was going on, and I'd go to people's places and they were just talking about superfluous random shit. I'm like, we're living through a major event going on here. No one knows what's happening. Let's talk about the real stuff. And when people wouldn't want to talk about that, I'm like, I can't talk about, just these basic gossipy things because it's painful. Like it's the boredom is so uncomfortable. And I think the advantage of being this, so basically what we have is this low baseline dopamine state, which would mean that we metabolize. So we either have like high activity of COMT or MAOB or both, which means that our baseline dopamine state is low. So it means that we are prone to being bored. But the advantage is that in highly stressful situations, we're in control, whereas other people would get overwhelmed. So the problem that we have is going, okay, we feel uncomfortably bored unless we're in a situation which is acutely stressful. And then it's being like, okay, how do I find situations that are acutely stressful and stimulating that are actually good for me? And a lot of the time, guys end up in like relationships with super toxic BPD chicks because it's just drama they get addicted to. Or they get into, drugs, gambling, all these kind of things which are unhealthy. But you also find this genotype is very overexpressed in things like surgeons, public speakers, musicians, military, cops, because they're the kind of guys who are like, yeah, I'm bored at baseline, so I'm going to find something that's go, go, go all the time to be able to scratch that itch of basically feeling at peace when there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. So like, one thing that I like doing a lot is like, fasting all day, going for like a big, 15,000 step walk, giving myself challenges. Like if you've read my ebooks, I wrote both of those books in one day. And I remember I was in Perth staying with my mom. Like I visit her for a month or two every year. And there's a co-working space I use in the city. And I woke up my mom and I have got a very good joking relationship. And I said, tell me I can't write a book in a day. And she looks at me and she goes, you can't write a book in a day. And I'm like, fucking watch me. And she's like, when will you be back? I'm like, when the book's done. I walk back and they're like 3 a.m. and she's like, where were you? I'm like, I wrote my book. And she's like, you wrote a whole book? I'm like, yep. I'm like, and then she proofread it the next day. And she's like, how did you write this in a day? I was like, it was horrible, but at least it wasn't boring. So it's interesting how we will, if we become aware of this and go, okay, there's nothing wrong with me, that this is arguably an evolutionarily advantage, but if it's put in the wrong environment, it could be a problem or it could be an asset. And then I think that's one of the really cool things about the evolution of the human brain is being like, we've evolved so far that, some people will empathize the well-being of the food chain over their own well-being. We question the meaning of life. We question of like, how did we get here? Why are we here? I mean, that's an amazing feat of consciousness. But I think the other thing that we can also do is we become hyper aware of the fact that we're all flawed in different ways. And this is one of the beautiful things that I've, again, going full circle, that I've learned from psychedelics, is that the stuff that we're talking about, there's nothing wrong with us. It's just potentially a strength that isn't being played yet. And then it's being like, well, how can I engineer my lifestyle or my goals or my career or whatever's going on to scratch that itch and to honor who I am, but to also be like, there's nothing wrong with me. I don't need medicating. I just need to be able to be in an environment where I play my strength. And that's why, every speech I've given, I haven't practiced it once. Like, I just write if you see me do any lectures on YouTube, I just write all the slides, hit record, and do it in one take. Because otherwise, if I practice it, I'll get bored. So, there's all these kind of situations where it's like, we need to find a way to play those strengths because there's nothing wrong with us. And then other people would look at us and be like, oh, I wish I could be more like this. I wish I could be more like that. And we look at them being like, oh, I wish I could be more like this. I wish I could be more like that. We just all got different strengths.
Again, very good review. You seem very similar to me in many ways, but more refined. You mentioned times of solitude or introvertism. And it's interesting to me because, at least in my experience, all of the introverts seem to be the most successful. And I guess it comes down to, you need a damn good amount of time on your own to study this stuff. You need, like I said before, you spent clearly thousands of hours researching HRT alone. I'm sure you have, because I know I've spent a lot of hours on it. So what's your workflow like, bro? I'm interested because I can kind of do it when I'm in the mood, right? Like, when I'm in the mood, I'm like you, I can go 8 hours, 10 hours, but then I might need 2-3 days of just dicking around, watching TV shows. I'm just not in a creative mood. I'm like, yeah, try, nah. But then when you're in that flow state, like, I don't want to lose it. So let's go here. Do you have a similar workflow, or do you have a very regimented schedule where at this part of the day you'll be creative and cognizant?
I'm probably more like you. I'm naturally very type B. Like, I see all these type A people, and most entrepreneurs are type A. I am not type A. Like, I get a lot of guys come to me with like issues like burnout. I'm like, bro, smoke a joint and watch a movie. Like, it's like, I would never have that problem. So I'm naturally type B. I spend the majority of my life being really lazy because I could get away with being lazy because I was smart. And it served me well. I didn't have to work very hard. I could, play video games, smoke weed, hang out, have a very chill life and still do relatively well. And that kind of work-life balance was what I was aiming towards right before I had this brain injury. I had a period in my life where it was right before I moved here. And I was engaged to the wrong woman, and I don't have anything bad to say about her. It was just, bad choice of a partner. And I was in a situation where, things went badly. The relationship went badly. I'd made the wrong choice in terms of my, selling a house and moving somewhere. And I was in a situation where I was like, I'd basically been discarded because I didn't have the sufficient amount of value. And, I definitely picked the wrong partner, but I definitely had a role to play in that. I wasn't someone who I respected and admired. And I found Andrew Tate's videos in like right when he started. Like, he had these old interviews with Rollo Tomasi. This was back in like 2020. And this was when he was a lot less filtered than he is now. Like, he was a lot more savage and to the point. And I was watching these videos, and he just made this point. He was like, unless you work your ass off, you're going to lose to people like me because it's player versus player. And I'll get the money, I'll get the girl, you will lose. And I was sitting there being like, he's not wrong. Like, I was sitting there being like, I haven't tried, and I'm sitting here whinging about the circumstances I have. So I basically got to the point where I was like, well, if I've gotten this far by not trying, I wonder how far I could get if I did try. And then I just objectively looked at my circumstances and went, well, it's not that hard to apply myself to something. I can just work harder and follow a system, even though I don't want to. And if that level of, I don't want to do that work, I kind of can't be fucked. But that discomfort is not as great as the consequence that I'm experiencing now as the outcome of not applying myself. So I was like, well, it's a lesser of an evil if I just overcome my type B laziness and just force myself to get the work done, because then I can change my circumstances and then I won't be in a situation that's a problem. So I just kind of picked the lesser evil, which was just to apply myself. And, if you look at every report that I'd ever had written from, all the teachers I went to at Scotch College, it was all like, David doesn't apply himself. And I would still get B's and A's, and, just David could be great if he applied himself. He's just too lazy. But I was lazy because I was like, this is all a waste of time. I can't be fucked. So I got to a point where I realized that the paradigm that I had been living my life had ended up in a outcome which didn't serve me, and it was my responsibility. So I got back to Perth, and I was, quite sad, like emotionally. It was a very sad point for me. And I was like, what would someone who I respect and admire in this situation do? And I just went, I'm going to move to Eastern Europe. I'm going to move to a country that I kind of know the layout. I knew Vilnius better than I knew Sydney or Melbourne, but I didn't speak the language. I barely knew anyone here. And I went, fuck it, I'm going to go and toughen myself up and create a much harder circumstance for myself, which is, living in a country where I don't know anyone, I don't speak the language. I'm going to get completely outside my comfort zone when I'm already uncomfortable. When most people would seek comfort, I'm just going to become the guy who does this. And then when I did that, I was like, oh, okay, that worked out really well for me. Maybe I could implement some of this type A stuff and force myself into this. So I've kind of got myself to a very comfortable point in the middle where my daily workflow is I do about 3 to 5 hours of calls a day, and then I do about 1 to 2 hours of blood work reviews for my clinics, which is about the maximum of what I can handle in terms of being, enjoying what I do and, getting good return on investment for my time. And then I leave 1 to 2 days per week open as lackey days. And sometimes those days will be me just walking around the castle here in the sun, listening to podcasts, enjoying my life, and doing fuck all because I deserve it, because I work unbelievably hard when I do work. Other times, I'll go and book a room at the Holiday Inn in Vilnius, which is like a very sterile, modern, cheap hotel room with a nice desk. And I'll take 200 milligrams of modafinil and I'll work for 12 to 14 hours straight on whatever project I'm going to do. So I like to leave those lackey days open to be like, do I need days to rest and recover and recharge? Or do I feel compelled to go and do something? And I'm sure it pisses my wife off. Like sometimes I'll wake up and I'm like, I need to write this next book. Like today is the day. So I just leave those days open to be able to do that. And then for everything else that I study, I don't have any notes. I mean, I have notes for my clients, but in terms of like mechanistic notes, like someone asked me, they're like, do you use like a spreadsheet? Or I'm like, notes. I'm like, I just remember everything. So I just learn everything that I'm interested in, and then I intrinsically understand it so that I can memorize it. And I guess being a musician, I've always memorized everything. So I research, I go down big research rabbit holes when I've got spare times and I'm interested. But a lot of the time, what is very therapeutic for me is I just walk around listening to my favorite music with a nice pair of headphones and enjoy the nature and enjoy being peaceful. And I never feel guilty for that, because when I do work, I'm very productive. And I know from seeing other people burn out that if I don't give myself that balance, that I'm going to, become miserable and depressed, and my quality of work's going to go through the floor. But also, I think it's important, like Hormozy talks about, to some days you fucking push it. So yeah, sometimes like next week, I'm launching a new project and I'm going to be in the Holiday Inn, 2 days in a row working my fucking ass off. And then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I'll probably turn my phone off and won't even open the computer and play with my puppy for 3 days straight in the sun. So I very much ride the ebbs and flows of natural motivation and never feel guilty for recharging, and also never stress myself to the point that I overwork, but I do push it pretty hard when I need to.
Very interesting take, bro. I agree with you. I'm very similar in that way. And as you have as well, acquaintances or friends that suffer burnout, I want to admit, it almost irritates me when people almost flex their work stress. It irritates me. I don't know why. I shouldn't be so annoyed. I think to myself, I want to scream at them and say, did you know that not sleeping is going to make your business worse, or stressing is going to make your business worse? Like I just feel that so much, that they're doing themselves a disservice by not chilling out. And I almost can't be in the room with those sorts of type A people that feel that sleep is weak, or you've got to be there, you've got to push through. I much prefer to talk to people like yourself who are, like you said, going through the natural waves of motivation. I really connect much better with people like that. It's almost like you're optimized, but you're open to the day where, okay, today's the bender, today's the Modafinil.
There was a saying
I feel it.
I really like
love
Andrew
that,
and Tristan.
That's
I know a lot of people don't, but that's okay.
I think it's cool.
I think it's important that people can take the good with the bad, and just because you don't like everything about someone doesn't mean they don't have valuable stuff to say. And there was a quote that Tristan said where he's like, I spend half my money as if I'm butchering this, but the point's the same. He says, I'm going to spend half my money as if I'm going to live for another week, and half my money like I'm going to live for many more decades. And I do the same with my time. So I spend half my time like I've only got a few days left on this earth, and I spend half my time like I'm going to be here for as 100 years. And that's why I think it's really important to build projects and invest, and don't just go off the handle and to borrow a word from 10 years ago and YOLO too hard. But also at the same time, still take time to sniff the flowers. People who are working 7 days a week, if you get hit by a bus next week, that's going to suck. You really want to be able to have that balance. And I think a lot of people at the moment feel guilty unless they're working their ass off. And, you should be able to live a productive, I think a lot of the time people aren't as productive as they think they are. They're just busy. And I like being productive. So if I'm going to work, I'm going to work. And if I'm going to rest, I'm going to rest and take time off. And I think that's really important, that people understand that we're all mortals, we're all aging, we're all going to die. And, quality of life is front loaded towards your younger years. And I guess I've just seen and spoken to so many guys in their 60s and 70s who just wasted their whole life, never enjoying anything. And that's why I think it's important to, take the time off, spend time with the people that you love, because anything could happen to anyone at any point. And, especially if you're doing well, if you've made some money and you've got some freedom, then actually use that freedom and enjoy it. Go on the fucking water slides, go to the theme park, go to the beach, go and do something fun for the sake of doing something fun because you can. And those little treats I give myself, I recently went up to Latvia and saw a concert that I wanted to see. In December, I'm going to Amsterdam to see Slipknot, which I'm really excited about. Giving yourself treats like that, there's no point in working your ass off and being successful if you don't get to do the things that you enjoy. You just got to be disciplined in having that balance.
I couldn't disagree. I mean, two things there. You mentioned before about feeling like you deserve that R&R. I'm in this place where every day is a holiday, so I never feel deserving of it. I think I need to get back to that. That's a really good point that you mentioned. We are built to work, I think at least me in my genetic tree, I am, knowing my father, his grandfather, etc. But the second thing, I mean, what would a podcast with TRT or Purpose be without mentioning the Tates? It's very interesting. I think that the Tates, Andrew Tate and Tristan Tate, when they first came across my Telegram, someone linked me. Everyone was like, "Look at this guy," and I started watching him. And at first, I figured, "Wow, this guy is a real showman, a comedian." A lot of it was real funny, but at the same time, he was saying things that I wouldn't necessarily show my mother. I wouldn't necessarily show my girl at the time. But I have to be honest with you, at the time, at least amongst the boys, I'm like, this guy's right. He's speaking to me. I'm not going to tell the public because I will look like a dick, but I just kept watching his stuff. It was I just kept watching his stuff. I never mentioned it. And I figured this person is going to get famous. And it was within a year, he became ultra famous. I was watching him before people were watching him. I think maybe you were as well. Real early stuff. And he was way more out there then. I mean, I think now looking back on it, it was part of his plan to almost purposely do it in an arrogant way. He's probably a kind guy in person, so who would I know? But that said, moving forward with my online personality, I'm not sure I want bro talk to be out there publicly because I'm having a daughter. There are definitely things he has said that if that were me and my daughter saw it, I'm not sure. Although intrinsically amongst the boys, it's very funny. And I'm like, he's right. Do you know what I mean? I'm in this place now where I'm just like, I'm not sure how to act, where it's really funny. Deep down, I love it. I just got to be honest to do. I love crude humor, bro. I'll admit it. But I'm not sure I want to be that person publicly. Do you ever wrestle with some of that stuff?
Yeah, I really like what he has to say about a lot of things, and I've been a very strong supporter of him from the start because his message put me on a completely different trajectory to live my life better. And I think, whether it's Andrew Tate's content or whether it's like Rollo Tomasi's The Rational Male book, I think that your baseline level of emotional maturity will impact how you respond to hearing that. Because I think it could make you a very bitter, jerk, or I think it could also make you a very rational, understanding guy who's just basically understanding the playing field of life. Because a lot of what he has to say is very true, whether people like it or not. And I think that that's why people find it quite abrasive, is because they don't like what he has to say, but they, a lot of the time, might know that some of it's quite true. But there's a lot of stuff, and people lump that all in together. I think that, I know that the internet is written in pen, and especially nowadays more than ever, I think people need to be very conscious of their digital footprint. And I think that, I'm very attracted to the stuff that he says because I grew up on punk rock, and his whole mentality and persona is very punk rock in every possible way. It's the ultimate middle finger up to the system. And I think that whether people agree with it or not, it's an important voice to have to balance out the mainstream narrative perspective. I think it's always important to have both sides of the debate visible, and for people to be able to listen and make an informed decision on what they have to say. This cancel culture is very toxic. But I think the reason why his message was so important for a lot of guys, because I've had heaps of clients who are fans of his, and they've all gone on to start beautiful families, wonderful relationships. They've all gone on to be very financially successful, very well-grounded, mature men. And it's about how they've applied what he has to say. And I found that, whenever I put up an Andrew Tate quote or a clip or something on my Instagram, there's always someone in my inbox who's just basically triggered and just starts blowing up at me. And I find it very interesting. I'm like, I don't even know you. Why are you saying all these things? But whenever I engage with them, I find that the people who are the most negatively and hostile, who have negative, hostile opinions about him, also have seen the least amount of his content. And I find that very interesting. I'm like, what? This is clearly you're just triggered emotionally, and that's okay. But why are you messaging me? I don't even know you. So it's interesting how the internet works in terms of the way the algorithms work. That social media used to keep you in a bubble. And now it basically forces, content on you from all over the world, and then it will engineer that to make you respond in a certain way.
If you want to have optimal testosterone levels, you have to take care of yourself as if you would be making those levels naturally. Otherwise, you're going to get these problems. That's when testosterone can not be conducive to health. You have to earn the testosterone that you're injecting. 90% of the side effects on TRT are caused by the unresolved issue that led to the low testosterone in the first place. And I stand by that.